Call to order this meeting of the James City Service Authority Board of Directors, special meeting. Good afternoon, Mr. Powell.
Good afternoon.
If you'd please call the roll.
Mr. McGlinnan.
Here.
Ms. Larson.
Here.
Mr. Hippel.
Here.
Mr. Eisenhower.
Here.
We do need a motion to allow Ms. Sadler to participate remotely due to an illness that prevents her from attending the meeting.
So move.
Okay, Mr. Powell, can you call the roll?
Mr. McGlinnan.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower.
Aye.
Ms. Sadler, do you designate the vice chair as the presiding officer for today's meeting?
Thinking about it.
All right, that totally broke up, so
Oh.
I'm designating you as vice chair.
Yes.
To preside over the meeting, if that's what you were asking.
Yes, I was. Thank you. At this
I
time,
was reading your lips on TV, so thank you.
you are very talented. Are there any presentations?
No presentations and no public comment.
Okay. If I could get a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Motion?
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The consent calendar was the minutes adoption. No public hearings either today?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll do board considerations, proposed FY 21-22 budget. Mr. Powell?
Good afternoon. The budget that was included in your packet for today's meeting is the same budget we presented at the public hearing in March. No changes have been made since then. I did want to show you this one slide that's before you. The purpose of this slide is just to show you basically what our status is in the current fiscal year. The fiscal year 20 operating expenses and revenues are on the left side of the chart. And those are through the month of March. That's the most recent where the numbers have been finalized. The April numbers are not completely finalized yet. I just wanted to show that in terms of the operating expenses and revenue at the end of March, we were in fairly good shape. Obviously, we were only a couple weeks into the pandemic at that point. But preliminarily, our revenues actually look okay in April as well. So if you compare where we were in March of 20 versus March of 19, it's pretty comparable, which is a good sign. Now, obviously, we do still have a few months to go, and things could change. But at least through the end of March, we were in good shape. And again, the preliminary numbers in April looked okay. At least on the operating side. We actually have not experienced quite the decline in tap fee revenue that we anticipated. We, at our last meeting, were anticipating about a $1.3 million deficit on our tap fees. Our estimate now is 1.1 to 1.2, so not a whole lot better, but a little bit. But that, at the moment, that's really the more of the concern than the operating budget. But I just thought that would be some helpful context as you discuss the fiscal year 21 budget. And again, the proposed budget that is in your packet is the same one that we proposed 3 weeks ago. I don't have any additional comments on that, and so, but I welcome any comments, questions, guidance you might have.
All right. With that, we move to board requests and directives. Look to the board with any comments or directives. Okay. All right. We do need a motion to amend the board's adopted calendar to reschedule the May 12th budget adoption hearing until June 9th at 5 p.m. Is there a motion?
Motion?
Thank you. Mr. Powell, if you call the roll.
Mr. McGlinnan.
Aye.
Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower.
Aye.
Ms. Sadler.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye. Okay. And a general manager's update. Mr. Powell?
I do have a few items to update you on. The first one is the bank loan RFP. At your last meeting, we discussed this as a possibility. You do not have to take any formal action on this, but since we did proceed with an RFP for a bank loan, since we went that route instead of going to a public sale, I did commit to you that I would bring the results of that back to you before we proceeded. We do have Courtney Rogers with Davenport on the line. He's going to walk you through a PowerPoint on the results of that bank loan RFP. I am recommending that we move forward with the low bid on that, which was 2.264% over 15 years, Key. But Mr. Rogers is going to walk you through a presentation. I'm going to call it up real quick. So Courtney, go ahead.
Okay, Doug, you were breaking up a little bit, so I apologize. I was waiting to hear from you. Say go. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry I couldn't obviously be together, but I won't get into too much details other than say, we started this conversation back before the world changed here, and you can see by the first 3 pages, the slides that I've got there, that between the good news is rates are still low. The bad news is if we tried to do this in March, it would have been ugly because rates jumped up because of supply and demand issues. Basically, people exiting the market, and the folks that are selling bonds were more sellers than buyers. And so that made rates go up temporarily. But they have come back down. They went back up a little bit, and then now we're kind of floating along. But we talked with Doug and Stephanie and suggested maybe we should just look at the banks. And so we floated out a RFP and got it back in back at the end of April. We got 4 proposals in, and the summary of it is that we had 2 banks that gave us 20-year options at 272 being the lowest, and 4 banks gave us a 15-year option with a 226 being the lowest. So we took those rates and we compared them to what we were seeing the same day we received these back in the public market. Now, keeping in mind that if we decided to change course, it would have taken us about 3 weeks at the best to lock in a rate in the public market. But we did see a differential. The public market, we were seeing about 40 basis points better at the 20-year option and about 20 basis points better at the 15-year option. And then, of course, as soon as we had a conversation on the next day with Doug and Stephanie, we saw the municipal market go up basically 20 basis points over the next 3 or 4 days. So we told them on that Tuesday that our recommendation was, let's just lock in this 226 if we're happy with the 15-year option, which they agreed they were, and call it a day and not try to play the market at this point with all the volatility that's out there. It's still a real good rate. It's fixed for the full 15 years. It's prepayable at any time at par if we decide to pay it off. And essentially what it does is it allows you to keep that $9 million in your bank account, which if this thing doesn't go away soon, it could be money well spent, or well borrowed in this case, to keep that cash at hand. So with that, I think what I'm going to do is just pause for a moment, see if there's any questions. But essentially, as Doug said, we just really want to get a head nod from you guys because we've received the formal approval from you all, as long as everybody's still in agreement to move forward.
I'm good.
Yeah, it
Yes,
seems,
indeed.
seemed like a good rate to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good numbers.
Go
Okay.
for it.
All right. Appreciate the feedback.
Ms. Sadler, do you have any further comments?
No, I think that sounds good. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And I think one thing I will point out, the 15-year option over the 20-year Sterling Bank option, that would be going with Key Bank at 226, does save $1 million in debt service by shortening it. It's a little bit higher payments, in those 15 years, but you do save over the long term. So I think that was the other thing that we liked about this option. So thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Courtney.
Yep. Thanks, Courtney. All right. I just had a
Okay. So if you guys are good, Doug, I'll sign off.
Yeah, that's fine, Courtney. Thank you very much.
Okay. Y'all, everybody take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a couple other quick items for information. May 1st is the beginning of the outdoor watering ordinance, so I just wanted to remind everybody that we are in the season now. If you have an odd address, your days are Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. Even number is Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Monday is a recovery day, and all irrigation should be done not within the hours of 9 a.m. between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. So. Also a reminder that May is the transition month for monthly billing. The May bills should be going out in a week or so, and so that transition really is upon us, and people will be getting those bills really within the next probably week or 2 weeks. I wanted to mention that regionally, utility directors are working on a press release or some public information efforts to remind businesses that have been closed for an extended period of time that they should flush their plumbing systems. So more details will be coming out about that, but just if any businesses are listening or watching, if you want more information, you can certainly call the JCSA office. But if your facility has been closed for a while and you reopen, stagnant water is not a good thing. So you need to flush your plumbing system. And we've had some discussions with the schools about that as well. I sent everybody an email yesterday, just a reminder. HRSD has chosen not to change their rates for this year. So I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. And the last thing I have is I wanted to recognize a long-term employee who retired on May 1st, Riley Hazelwood, who had been a foreman in our wastewater section. After 32 years, has retired, and Riley's has been a significant leader and mentored a lot of young folks over the years in JCSA, and it was unfortunate that we could not give him a going away like we would normally do when somebody retires. It's one of the things that is a victim of the situation that we're in now. But I did want to recognize 32 years to the Service Authority is a very significant contribution, and I just wanted to recognize his efforts. That's all I have.
Okay. Well, with that, and thank you very much. Appreciate that, and thank you to that. That's quite an accomplishment, 32 years. So with that, if we could get a motion to adjourn until 5 p.m. on June 9th, 2020 for the regular meeting.
So moved.
Well, let me interject. June 9th was the meeting to adopt the budget, but we have our regular scheduled meeting, which is already on the calendar, is 3 weeks from today, which is the
May
26th,
28th,
May 26th. So you should adjourn to May 26th.
Do we need to amend the calendar? Did we already do that? Amend the calendar to do away with the meeting? No, we don't have-
You did a motion earlier to
Take care of the
reschedule the meeting from
Okay,
May
that's-
12th to June 9th. So that's taken care of.
Okay.
And
I
so you just need
Wanna
to
make sure we
adjourn
can-
to your regularly scheduled meeting of May 26th.
I apologize.
That's okay.
So moved.
Thank you. Mr. Powell, if you could call the roll.
Mr. McGlinnan. Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower. Ms. Sadler.
Aye.
And Ms. Larson.
Aye. Thank you. With that, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll call to order this meeting of the James City County Board of Supervisors for a work session. Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
Yes, sir. Mr. McGlinnan,
Here.
Ms. Larson,
Here.
Mr. Hippel,
Here.
Mr. Eisenhower.
Here. Okay, we need a motion to allow Ms. Sadler to participate remotely due to an illness that prevents her from attending.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion. Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
Mr. McGlinnan.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower.
Aye.
Motion
Okay,
carries.
and we check in to make sure Ms. Sadler is still with us.
I'm here, thank you.
Good. Okay. We now go to board discussions. We have 4 items this evening, and we've got a grant award and an emergency ordinance we'll deal with first, and then we'll go into the 2020 and 2021 budget. So we'll start with grant award, Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, Provider Relief Fund, $84,994. And it had Chief Ash, but I don't know if who's going to do the
I don't know
presentation.
if Ms. Day can do that or not. It was a grant that came through our carrier for EMS services through the CARES Act, and it was if you accept the grant, it would bring those funds here, and then as they have more opportunities for funding, you can't have one pending that you haven't accepted, so the idea was we would have you accept this grant for $84,000, and then we would move on. We would be eligible if another opportunity came up. We wouldn't have a delay in applying for future funds.
What does this grant?
It is covering
Cover.
ambulance service.
Okay.
It came through our billing provider on the ambulance side. They were seeking out, I guess, for all of their clients, but it was some funding specifically for that type of reimbursement. And I think it was due to a loss of revenue during the time. There were some criteria, but we met that criteria, and it did, in fact, provide that grant to us.
Thank you.
Okay,
Need a motion to approve, is it?
do we have a motion to approve?
I'm so moved.
Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan.
Aye.
Ms. Sadler.
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Our second item is emergency ordinance to suspend tax payment penalty and to waive convenience fees. Mr. Kinsman.
If you, that was, pull my board up and look.
That's Jenny, treasurer.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, the county administrator requested that the board consider whether to temporarily waive the imposition of the 10% fee for late payment of personal property taxes effective through August 5th, 2020. Interest at the rate of 10% per annum will still be imposed, so I think it's 0.83% per month. And in addition, you may wish to extend the waiver of the convenience fee that you did earlier this year, also through August 5th. If you'd like to do both of those, I recommend that you adopt the emergency ordinance. We'll need to come back to you within 60 days to officially adopt it. Happy to answer any questions.
Need a motion?
Motion.
Motion for approval?
Thank you.
Stevens?
Mr. McGlinnan.
Aye.
Ms. Sadler.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. We now go to current fiscal year 2020 budget discussion. Mr. Stevens.
Ms. Day is prepared to lead that, and really just the FY 2020. I'll turn it over to Ms. Day to carry us through that. We just want to make sure you're okay with where you ended up. We thought you were, but just make sure on the current year where we think we are, and then we'll move into the next one. So, Ms. Day?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Chairman, members of the board. At the April 21st work session, the board requested that staff review the latest developments and prepare reductions to the fiscal year 21 proposed budget for the board to consider. I did want to mention that my staff did the heavy lifting for tonight's presentation, specifically Cheryl Cochet, who's the FMS Assistant Finance Director, and also Margot Zeckman, who is one of our senior budget and accounting analysts. Cheryl is on the phone with us tonight as well. I wanted to first start with the
Hi,
current
good
year.
evening.
Evening.
Yes. So starting with the current year, fiscal year 20 budget impact, as we had previously presented, most of the revenue reduction that we're projecting for this fiscal year is a 3-month impact, and the estimate is $7.6 million. Most of that does come from the sales, meals, and lodging taxes. In terms of where the expenditure reductions would come from, the scenario that's been presented, at least at this point, is a 50-50 split with the school division, roughly $3.8 million on each side. I did want to give an update on the meals and the lodging tax collections. As we discussed at the last work session, the estimates for that had previously been at about 40% reduction. Both of those taxes were due on April the 20th. We did continue to collect through the end of the month, and we also are still collecting some of the March collections. Currently, the meals tax is at about 49% collection, so that's about a 50% reduction, and the lodging tax is at 69%. For our projections for April through June, we assumed that that would be 75%. We do expect April through June to get worse, again, because March was only a partial month impact. I do think we'll continue to collect a little bit more of March, again, because of the non-filers. But at this point, I think our estimates will be pretty close to where we come in. Okay, moving on to the fiscal year 21 budget. Looking at the revenue side, this table reflects the proposed budget for 21's revenue as originally proposed on April the 2nd, followed by the overall reductions to the general fund budget of 5%, 10%, 15%, and 20% scenarios, all related to the COVID-19 impact. And what we're trying to show you here is the total proposed budget was $216 million. And then what the bottom line general fund budget would be after those different scenarios. So the 205, the 194, the 183, and the 172. The next slide quantifies that. So what we're doing here is comparing the proposed budget to the revised budget under each of those scenarios. To arrive at those overall percentages, staff had to analyze each revenue source and make a lot of assumptions. We had to determine how those specific line items should be reduced. So for example, under the 5% scenario, the general property taxes, which again is primarily real estate and personal property taxes, were reduced by less than 1%. But the other taxes, for example, sales tax, meals tax, lodging tax, were reduced by almost 20%. And again, that's under the 5% scenario. One development I did want to mention that is not related to COVID-19, but does have an impact that occurred after we proposed the budget, is a modification to the state's budget where they've eliminated the recordation tax distribution to localities and redistributed that money to the Hampton Roads Regional Transit Fund. What that means to us is a $400,000 loss in revenue to the general fund. That has been incorporated in the above numbers and is reflected in the Commonwealth line. Moving on to the expenditure impact, this table reflects the overall reductions to the 21 proposed budget, again, under those 4 scenarios, 5, 10, 15%, and also where we were with the proposed budget. It provides the revised figures in the major categories to get us to the new total general fund budget under those scenarios. On this next slide, we're presenting the dollar impact of each of those scenarios. The reductions again here to each individual line items are based on feedback from the departments, discussions we've had with agencies, and various discussions with the school divisions. The projected adjustments also reflect any expenditure lines that are directly tied to revenue, which you often hear from us when we talk about lodging tax, and also staff analysis of just trend data information. In addition, the table reflects the county and the schools sharing those reductions at a 48%, 52% split, respectively. And the logic behind that is that's the current split in the originally proposed budget.
Can I grab you real quick on, and it may just be a typo on, page 3, the, revenue impact for the, 10-year or 10% reduction is 194,428. And on the expenditures, all the others match, but the 10%, which is 197, there's might be a typo on
Is it
those
on
two.
page 3, slide 3?
Yes,
Page 3, slide 5.
10% reduction and the revenue impact is 194,428. And if you turn to page 4 on expenditures, and that 10% reduction is 197,428. It's a
Yes.
$5 million difference in the two.
Right,
I don't know if that's a typo or
Well, it's 3 million, ain't it?
right.
three. Yeah. Yeah, 3. I don't know if that was a typo.
It is, it's a typo.
That's what I figured. The
We're-
others are matching
We're working
up.
on this afternoon, so I
I
believe
understand.
it's a typo.
I just wanted to pull that up, just,
You know which one is the correct?
That's what I was looking to see, if I have that,
say probably.
if it's in one of the handouts.
So,
It's in the 10%.
Yes.
194,428 is the correct number. So the revenue is the correct number.
Yeah, Mr. Hill, I believe it's on the slide, the expenditure side, the 197 ought to be closer to that, should be that 194.
94, that's what I figured. I
Thanks,
figured
Greg.
there's
We'll
probably a
correct that.
typo in there.
Yes, sir, thank you for catching that.
It was $3 million.
On slide 10.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So looking at the different scenarios, under the 5% scenario, the impact on the expenditure budget would be about $2.9 million. And again, here, what we try to do is highlight really the bigger, more significant reductions in terms of what that impact would look like. It does still provide for the 4 new positions that we had discussed, some reclassifications, and the reserve for compensation. It does continue with a hiring freeze through September 30th. It includes cuts to temporary salaries and overtime across various departments. It includes cuts to citizen outreach and educational programs. It puts limits on certain offerings through our parks and recreation activities. And then there's additional reductions to items such as dues and memberships, travel and training, various recognition events for our staff, delaying or deferring certain furniture and equipment and vehicle purchases and replacements. Moving into the 10% scenario, we basically continue with some of the same things from the 5% scenario, but then we add to that an extension of the hiring freeze through December 31st. It removes the new positions, reclassifications, and the reserve for any employee raises. And it also cuts further into our programs. An example would be the elimination of the General Services Program to set up the street lights in existing neighborhoods, and then some other reductions in professional services across the departments. In the 15% scenario, again, we continue with all the cuts under the 10% scenario. The hiring freeze continues through March the 31st. And then we're cutting deeper into our programs. Again, some examples would include areas such as general services, street maintenance, repairs to sidewalks and parking lots, parks and rec improvements for equipment replacements and playgrounds, and then just other activities and programs that we offer our citizens. Under the 20% scenario, here we've assumed the hiring freeze continues for the entire year. The cuts continue under the same 15% scenario. We've also introduced the furlough of employees. How that would look and who it would be something that would need to be determined at a future date. And then we've also proposed that the increase in our health insurance premiums be paid from the health insurance reserve, and that's about $400,000. Over on the capital side, this slide represents a handout that you've received tonight. We wanted to include it on the presentation for the public to see as well. And what we're doing here is providing the proposed CIP projects and that very first column that's labeled amount. And then we went through each of the scenarios so that you could see by individual project which projects are being impacted under the different scenarios. We also did reach out to our departments to help us prioritize these projects. We've included that as well, and we've listed those in order of the priorities. We did factor in pretty heavily their input. We also made considerations for items such as borrowing or issuing capital leases. If there were grants involved, we tried to not defer those projects so we could take advantage of those opportunities where it made sense. And again, as you can see here, when we go from 5 to 20%, all the way at the 20% mark, we've pretty much eliminated everything in the CIP other than two what we consider safety issues with the CAD replacement system and their RMS replacement system for the fire and police departments respectively. There, what we would propose to do is continue with those equipment replacements because they are considered critical to the service delivery, but finance those through leases. Looking into the next category, which is our transfers to other funds. Again, we've outlined the different scenarios here. The biggest impact in our transfers to other funds is that 60% transfer of the lodging tax revenue to the tourism fund. Again, if we're projecting reductions in revenue, the transfer to the tourism fund would go down as well. This also includes reductions to our social services and housing programs based on the feedback that we receive from those funds. And it also includes reductions to the county's transportation match, which represents the county's commitment to the VDOT revenue sharing program. The amount budgeted for the transportation match in '21 was $1,450,000. And you can see here we're taking reductions of 25% under the first scenario, moving on to 50% in the second scenario, 75%, and then 100% in the 20% scenario. We do have a balance in our transportation match fund that we would propose we fully utilize before we add additional funding to it. Over on the contributions that we do make to our outside agency partners, in all scenarios, we've made the same assumption here that the reduction would be about $472,000. What we did here was we level funded their contributions with fiscal year '20, or we took reductions for those that we've been in contact with and we felt could offer up some additional funding to us, either in terms of a refund of fund balances they're currently holding or reductions to their budget. We did hear from quite a few. We've been working with the jail, the Juvenile Detention Center, the Williamsburg Regional Library, to mention a few of those. We are continuing to talk with several others as well, as they're looking at their budget and also making a lot of the same assumptions that we're having to make. I did want to mention through those discussions, it's become very apparent that their service levels are being impacted. The more challenging the times, the need to provide services often goes up. Over on the school side, first looking at the operations, these reductions to the county's contributions to the schools really consist of two parts. The first one reflects the revenue from the state for the sales tax for education. Again, that money does come to the county and we pass that on 100% to the schools. And then additional reductions to the operational contribution that we make to the schools at 52% in order to get to the 52% overall reduction of our funding to the schools. I also wanted to mention there was one late announcement. It was on Friday of last week. The governor did announce that he has approved $238.6 million of CARES funding for the Virginia Department of Education. They have allocated those dollars to the local school division, and we recently received what our share would be. It's approximately $1.2 million.
That one time, that's obviously one-time funding.
It would be, yes.
So that would be something that they would get this year that they would not get next year.
Correct. And whether it would be this year or sometime this summer is still open.
They don't.
They don't know. Correct. Also, in working with the schools, we did ask them to prioritize their capital projects. They were able to get that to us in time for tonight's presentation. I know they're also still working diligently on their CIP and looking at different safety issues as well as capacity issues. Obviously, a lot of this depends on when school opens as well. But I did want to provide the information we have here so you could see in terms of our CIP and the funding we provide to them, what they deem their highest priorities. That's all I have to present tonight. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, questions on the presentation to begin with?
Well, I don't know if it's, so we've been inundated with emails. It seems that several members of the school board have encouraged the parents to write to us regarding the use of reserve funds to pay for the shortfall, which there's going to be a scenario where there is and that is not a recommendation that you and the county administrator are making. And I was hoping that you could touch on that.
If I can, I'd like to ask her to expand a little bit on it too, because I think there's a misconception on the part of the public, general public, since this was referred to as a contingency fund. It is actually fund balance, and I think that the purpose of that for liquidity and the fact that it's something that affects our bond rating, and that if you spend that money, it's not a recurring source of money. It's you would be then allocating some essentially one-time money for what is for most budgeting processes an ongoing expense. So if you could maybe lay that out for the general public a little bit better, I think that would be greatly appreciated.
It's certainly one of the scenarios that we always discuss and that we're always looking at as a potential funding source. A lot of times it depends on the impact and how long you expect that impact to continue. You are correct, it is frowned upon from our rating agencies. It's really there for items that are one-time major hits. One of my biggest concerns now would be the timing of that. We are in hurricane season. We're getting ready to enter hurricane season. And we've had several storms over the last couple of years, and it's been our experience that FEMA, the federal government, and the state are very slow to reimburse. It can take 2 to 4 years to get our reimbursements. For those that were here during Isabel, it was a $15 million storm. We have $30 million in the bank. So as you can tell, that would cut our reserves in half, plus we have to continue with our operations with tax collections only happening twice a year. So that's one of my concerns initially. Certainly appreciate that the magnitude of this and how long it goes on, that becomes a bigger consideration and something that we may have to look to do. You do technically have to have a plan before you ever utilize your fund balance. Your credit rating agencies are going to want to know, what are you using it for, to what extent, how long, and what's your plan to replenish it? And so those are things that we would need to spend a lot of time discussing and make sure that we did have all that outlined. My recommendation would be before we ever go to that extent.
So just to back, because I received an email today that said that we could, quote unquote, get our reserve funds flush with cash in no time. So could you explain a little bit about what it would take to replenish those funds and how you see that playing out, I guess, for...
Absolutely, and I'll base it on just the time I've been here, which of course has only been about 3 years. The county does not budget really for contingency. Our entire general fund is $216 million. We have $100,000 in a contingency fund. That's highly unusual. Most localities have $500,000 to $1 million. So we're already banking on having some savings to cover us if we have any shortfalls. Since I've been here, our average give back or net income has been under $2 million. It's really difficult to get any closer to that and not go over budget. And what I mean by that is that's the extent that revenues have exceeded expenditures, roughly $1.5 to $1.8 million. So if we were to dip into our fund balance, let's say for $5 million, it would take us 3 or 4 years to restore that if we went back to normal operation tomorrow.
Which we're not going to do.
Which is not most likely not going to happen.
And Ms. Larson, I would add too, the hurricane threat is there. We also talk about we'll reopen businesses, we go back to work, we have another time where things are shut down again, and we have another opportunity where we might need those funds. And so I would be very hesitant. I think the county's in good financial condition, but it's not the time, in my opinion, to spend our reserves or our fund balance for ongoing costs where we have the threat of hurricane season in a few months and a threat of a recurrence that could have an impact on the county and the services we provide in the fall. And I think there will be some funding at the federal level that's moved to the state that we will recover some of what we've spent. Whether we get our loss in revenue, I don't know yet. I think that really remains to be seen and how those programs play out. But it's too early at this point for us to, in good conscience, to give you advice that you ought to spend any of the reserves at this time or our fund balance. We're not trying to do that on the county side, and we're making pretty significant cuts in our budget too, police and fire included in that, trying to get our side of the operational budgets back to be within the revenues that we're projecting as well. So.
One other question too was with the what we did earlier this evening, where we said we were going to defer from June to August collection due date for property taxes. Bills, the revenue now comes in 2 months later, assuming it does, and but the expenses are still there, and so that this fund balance provides us the liquidity to keep operating. And that if we draw that down, that gives us much less ability to weather downturns when the revenue comes in.
Yes, it is a cash flow buffer that really gets us between those 6-month marks between the June 5th and the December 5th tax collections. That's when the majority of our cash comes in. A lot of that money is also invested. And so if we were looking to utilize some of our fund balance, we'd want to look at the stock market and make sure we time that so we're not taking those funds away from investments and lose money or get hit with penalties as well. The stock market's all over the place. You just heard Courtney Rogers say that tonight. In March, things were terrible. Right now, it's leveled back off, but it's very volatile. And so if we've invested $14 million and we go to take it out tomorrow, it may only be worth 12. So we've lost $2 million right off the bat. So those are some of the considerations as well.
Do you draw the distinction between these cash reserves and a rainy day fund? So, see, at the state level, there is a rainy day fund, which is in fact specifically created for the purpose of addressing revenue shortfalls, and there are limitations on how you can access that money and so forth. This is not really that, is it?
That's correct. We have not established an official revenue stabilization fund, which is really what a rainy day fund is. We do have other reserves for specific things. So, for example, I mentioned social services and housing. Those that receive state and federal dollars have their own fund balance because those dollars are restricted by grants. We have a health insurance reserve that's also restricted. That's money employees and the employer have put in specifically for health insurance. So what we have left is our undesignated fund balance. It's not necessarily for revenue shortfalls as much as it is to help bridge the gap between tax payments and one-time uses such as a hurricane or some other type of major disaster.
Now, and I mentioned it last meeting in the hurricane season, and I'm glad you mentioned it today because, the last one we went through, I was here and we burned all the debris and caused a lot of problems over in Caesar Trace and a few other places with ashes. We're not going to be able to do that because we don't have the facilities, we don't have the area to burn it or anything else. So it's going to be even more of a cost, not an escalated cost of just doing business from one year to another, but also in getting rid of this product. And so there's a lot more to it than I think the general public are aware of. I might as well say it right now. I was upset to hear that a board member or two from the school board was encouraging citizens to send emails to this Board of Supervisors and telling us that they want to be fully funded when we're making drastic cuts all through the community. This board has worked very well with the school board and want to continue. And I'm sure that wasn't I would imagine that wasn't their direction as to circumvent this board, and telling us what we need to do on our side of the fence. But it is a slippery slope for the school board to go down this path with this Board of Supervisors. We are very concerned. We want to fully fund the schools when we can and if we can. But if the money's not there, we do not have a magic wand and can create it there. Do any of us want to cut anything from school? No, we don't. But if we've got to cut ourselves, the school board, we all live in the same house. We've all got to work together. If we take a hit, we take a hit together. And if we start coming back up, we start coming back up together. And we will continue their funding and whatever we can do in keeping it the amount that we've always done. Since I've been on this board, we haven't cut the school board. We've raised. We've been very generous. Even when the state wasn't able to do it, this board came forward and did more than what was required of this board because we love our students, we love our teachers, we love our schools, we have good quality education in James City County. And I don't want anybody to think that we're not funding something because we don't like the schools or we think we can cut there or whatever. We're cutting across the board. So the emails that we had been all getting is a shame that this would be encouraged. I think it does more harm than good when two boards are in a critical position like this, have to work together We don't have the funds that we had before. We're trying to figure out what we do have and what we don't have and how we can work together. So I would encourage the members of the school board to work in harmony with the Board of Supervisors so that we can get them as much as possible. We can make sure that we keep the schools funded as we get funds coming back in. We can start, moving that forward as we start recovering from this. But there are times that we are gonna have to cut, and I hope no one takes my comments in a negative way. It's only for growth and positivity and where we need to work together, and that I know as a fact that I could speak for this board as far as we care about our kids, we care about our students, we care about our schools, we care about our teachers. And we were put in a position with this whole thing, as y'all are, we're all in this house together, that we have to work within the means we have. And we have to spend the money that we have, and we can't make any more money. So, but we'll get through this together. School board, we'll get through this together. We will do what's right. We will protect and do everything in our power. But let's just team up and we'll make it through.
Wondered if I could ask, so I had a couple conference calls last week with VACO. There seems to be just no idea what's going to happen with federal money that's supposed to be coming back to the states. Because I wondered if possibly the state would be willing to allocate some of the money that they're getting to help localities that are facing these shortfalls, but there doesn't seem to be a plan that I've heard of yet as to what localities will be receiving, et cetera. Have you heard of any idea of this?
I have not. I've been on the same kind of calls with VACO and VML representatives, and there hasn't been anything significant that I've heard from them to say that money's going to flow to localities yet, or if it does, how it would do and what it would look like. There's smaller parts of it, and there is some FEMA money, and we've been asked for some meetings to set up for FEMA. So those I think we will reimburse our costs. I've thought that from the beginning, that any expenditures we've had in overtime or maybe direct support for the COVID effort or supplies, we expect to get that. But in terms of lost revenues, I don't know enough. Ms. Day, any more from you?
I agree. I'm on several listservs with my counterparts throughout the state, and pretty much that's the frustrating point that we're all feeling at this point. There's a lot of information out there, and people read, the newspapers, and there's lots of programs. There's a lot of confusion over what the federal government's passing on to states, and then what the state's going to do with that money. For the most part, localities don't receive funds directly from the federal government as part of this CARES package. We don't know when, we don't know how much. The information I shared previously from the Virginia Department of Education, the $1.2 million that the schools will receive, is the only locality-specific number I have seen. And even then, we don't know what it has to be used for or when it's going to be received.
And I would just add to that comment, the only other money I've been aware of going directly to localities are some CDBG funds. If you are a community that has that program and are receiving those funds directly, there have been some appropriations, I know, in the Hampton Roads areas, but counties generally, we do not have that type of funding that's a direct appropriation to us, and so we've not received that, but I know a number of cities, particularly the larger one in our area, have as part of this. And then I know the CARES, what we just asked you to approve earlier for the EMS side, that was a pleasant surprise for CARES funding. So I don't want to tell you it doesn't exist and there won't be something more coming. But as Ms. Day said, it's been very hard to get that information. And again, it does take time from the law passage to development to figure that out, to move it forward and communicate that. So I think we'll get more information. I just have not counted on receipt of any additional funds yet until we know what the criteria might be.
I was under the impression from listening to some of the debate earlier about what had come from the federal government to the state government under the CARES, and that for it to come, my understanding was that for any of that money to come to us from the state would require things like we had ambulance fees, something specific to the COVID, which would then come as sort of a reimbursement. But that as far as shortfall of just revenue shortfalls, that is what the next round, which Congress has already locked horns over and said it probably ain't gonna happen, is that would be the one where they would begin to address revenue shortfalls for local jurisdictions. And till such time as I think our federal government does something like that, I think our state government is a little bit hamstrung in that there are restrictions on the money they get from the federal government, and in order to pass it along to us, it has to meet very strict criteria, which is why we've only gotten this little bit so far.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Sadler had a question. When you get to a point where you could let her
Yeah,
in.
Ms. Sadler?
Hi, thanks. Sharon, could you, I'm hoping that the public understands where we get a lot of our revenue from, but just for clarification, do you happen to know what the impact is going to be funding from with the tourism industry and also with the small businesses? Do we know typically what we receive and what impact there may be in both those two categories?
I know we've been talking to the Tourism Council, that's part of the Alliance, and they were able to provide us some estimates on our sales tax and our meals tax and the percentage that comes from non-residents. I believe the percentages were 40% for sales tax and 35% for meals tax. So that at least gave us some kind of idea of, the impact there for us to be able to estimate. Of our lodging tax, it could be as high as 90%. Again, we're still tracking that. We only have March's numbers, and that was only for half of a month. But that does give us some basis to estimate. I did want to mention, too, kind of getting back to the CARES package, although we don't have a lot of numbers, we are receiving some guidance about how to track our information, and our departments are on top of that. I can tell you we are almost in daily communication with them as we're cutting purchase orders or making P-card purchases. We're tracking all this information on a spreadsheet, and VDM at the state has been great to work with. So when the information does start to come in about when and where and how much, we're ready. We have our information ready, so.
Right, and I think I pointed out.
So do you can you share, like, for instance, lodging, what, if it was a 90% reduction in some of these, rather than talking percentages, what are those actual figures?
Well,
if you happen to have those that you can pull out of the top of your head.
Our lodging tax is about $2.9 million. So if we had a 90% reduction, we would lose $290,000. Or we would only collect $290,000.
2.6 million.
Our meals tax, I believe, is about $5 million, 4.9 or so. And again, let's just say 50% of that comes from non-residents, and that's the impact from tourism. Then you'd be looking at, 2.5 million.
About sales tax, because that was meals tax, right? You just said.
Sales tax, so we have three different sales tax number. It's about 4.6 million for the historic tax, so that would be 2.3. Our regular sales tax is about $11 million, so 5.5 there. And then our sales tax that goes to education, which I believe is in the $12 to $13 million range.
I would offer that your request of them to provide that information on tourism, where you had asked, what would it take in the way of a property tax increase to offset the losses that if we didn't recover. Basically, we had literally a shutdown of our tourism industry. I thought that was a very, very well done document. It had all the assumptions. It had all of it, like you talked about, what came from tourism and everything, and that our proposed budget relies on about 51 million, of which I guess in these particular categories that are affected by tourism, of which almost 16 million is from tourism. So that, if you lost tourism, you take basically about a $16 million hit to your economy. And I think it said it was 14.5 cents on the property tax rate would be what it would take to accommodate that. But I thought that was a very, very helpful, because it put into context for me the impact of the tourism revenues that are on the line that could be lost in a worst case scenario. So that, I think, was very helpful.
And that is of course stretched over the full year.
Yeah, over the full year.
There's definitely peaks and valleys in tourism.
Yes,
And we've missed one, which was spring break.
yes,
We're quickly going to miss Memorial Day,
yes. And even Mother's Day.
Mother's
Even
Day,
Mother's Day with
graduation,
graduations.
which is
Yes.
big.
Yes.
That'll be in October for college.
Yeah, but will it have the same bang that it has had? So, I mean, we're
July 4th is coming up.
Yes.
yeah, so, because, I mean, there has been some correspondence received that, has said absolutely no tourist this summer. Residents have written and said, oh, you can't have tourists here this summer. But there's a price for that. If we don't have tourists here, at some point we have to make another decision in the way of a real estate increase. I mean, we have to, unlike the federal government, we cannot print money. So, we can't go trillions of dollars into debt. We have to live with our means, which right now are getting slim. So,
Sharon, is there a way, do you happen to have figures handy just so the public knows what kind of a loss we're looking at with Busch Gardens being closed?
I do not.
Ms. Sadler, we really haven't got business-specific information. We have it more of as a global tourism in general is what we've worked on, and so we don't have it impact business by business. And again, we can ask for some of that data, but I haven't heard
probably don't want to,
of that granular
they
yet.
won't want to give that.
That's been my experience. That's typically proprietary information that,
Do we have any further follow-up? I know that Busch Gardens was approaching the governor about a phased reopening plan for the summer, and I think they were working in conjunction with King's Dominion on that approach. Have we heard any feedback at all from?
Not this week. I know late last week I had some email exchanges with Kevin Lemke, the president of Busch Gardens, that he felt they were making progress, but they didn't have a plan yet in terms of what would allow them to reopen and when. He was on one committee and felt pretty comfortable with that. A King's Dominion representative was on another committee at the state level, and so he felt like their voices were being heard, but they didn't have a plan back here. And then I know locally he is talking, and his staff, with our local health department staff, trying to make sure they can convince them that their practices that they're contemplating make sense to the health department, so that those things can come together when it does become time where they're allowed to reopen.
And I think when we talked about reopening, we talked about a soft reopening and sooner than later. And I'm sure the governor's probably watching our meeting because we've got a very important meeting. So Governor, we'd like to open up tomorrow if possible. But, Busch Gardens is such a big place. I wouldn't think it would open up with, say, 5%. They would probably have to wait till their numbers would get equal to their revenue coming in, and that would be their decision. So as far as people getting real nervous that Busch Gardens is going to open tomorrow, that was one of the emails we got that, we're talking about a soft opening. Some barber shops and some restaurants and that sort of thing, something, that keeps the economy going, people getting out a little bit more, we could almost, in the churches, I think I'm gonna tell the pastors and all, maybe if they go over to Walmart or Lowe's on Sunday, there's a big gathering of people there. I mean, they could have a good service right there in the parking lot. But, it's very frustrating that some places can open and some places can't. I understand safety, I understand distance, I understand that, that there is an issue, but I also understand that we can't just roll over and say, you know what, a pine cone hit me in the head and the sky's falling. It's not happening. And it's very frustrating that we in America are not smart enough to stand up and say, we can handle this and we can do it slowly, thoughtfully. We've got great doctors, great people in there that we can slowly open piece by piece. And I'm sure
I would agree, sir. And those who don't feel comfortable about going out, like myself, I have ongoing health issues. I am being responsible for myself and my family, and I choose to do this from home. And thank you for everyone in the tech department for accommodating me and helping me through this. But I would agree that at some point, it's going to be up to individuals to take responsibility, and we've been trained with our social distancing and everything else, that we should be, if we can be nose to nose, like I'm hearing about people doing at grocery stores and everywhere else, we can open our churches. They can add extra services to distance people out. I mean, there's creative ways to get things moving and get things open so that we're not looking forward to being able to get back to as normal as we can in short order.
I think part of the frustration is that, I know for me, I am very frustrated by what I see as a lack of a plan. What's the plan? I mean, I realize that there's a very big health component. We have the governor coming out 3 times a week, but where's the other discussion going on about things like the federal money and how that may, even if there's not an amount known, there could be a plan. This is what we're looking for from localities. This is what, so that we have some idea. And maybe that's happening and we just haven't heard about it, but I mean, I was copied on an email last week where that was the very question that was asked by VACO. What's the plan? Localities need to know the plan. We were told that we were doing all of this in order to have hospitals to have time to prepare. We didn't want to overwhelm hospitals. We needed to make sure there were enough ventilators. We needed to make sure there was enough PPE. But yet, the other thing I hear, well, we might have to do this again in the fall. Okay, so are we not prepared? How do we get prepared in the fall? Because I guess I realize I've taken criticism, but you can't just shut down the economy every 3 months. I mean, there are people in James City County that are really hurting. You know, there are a lot of people that are continuing to do very well through this pandemic. There are others that are very much hurting. So what is going to be the litmus test for whether or not we are going to close in the fall? I think we need to know that now in May, frankly. Because if that is going to be an option, what does that look like? And what numbers are those? And so, or did we close in order to get the hospitals to have enough? What do they look like? Do we have enough ventilators on hand now? Do we have enough PPE to get us through another year? So that's what I would like to know. I mean, I have to, Mr. Stevens, remember that you and I talked after one particular call where the 1918 flu was brought up. Well, remember what happened? Remember? And you said, we've not come anywhere in 102 years. I mean, there is some truth to that. I would hope that medical science has made some advances in 102 years. So why are we seeming to just, oh, well, you know what happened after 1918? Well, it's, my goodness, I mean, it's 2020. We've made some real, I realize we don't have a vaccine. I realize we don't know everything. I mean, somebody told me today about some students that in New York that were young and this thing is just unbelievable in its power, so to speak. But I would like to know, what is the planning moving forward, and where is the best place to get those answers? And so it would seem that up there in Richmond, we would have enough people that could be working on this side of it to get us through now, and we could have others that were working with localities to prepare us for what's to come and to answer some of those questions. How do we go about getting some of those answers? Because it's hard to sit here and look at a budget and say, okay, I'm going to take the 5% and I have no idea what happens in September if there's another outbreak and you say to me, well, we got to close everything. And so we bring everything to a screeching halt. We put our school kids back in this situation. So how can we go about getting some task force, let's start let's start making a plan for the future.
Ms. Larson, some of that frustration, I think, is shared by all of us in the room, not knowing and not getting information. I know on the regional calls with the other CEOs across Hampton Roads, they don't have that either, and they're asking for those same kinds of things. I know VACO and VML, our representatives in Richmond, we've been told the best way to get information to the state is through VACO and VML, so we are having those kind of conversations. It just isn't flowing out yet. I know, or at least I'm told, there are a number of task force that are going on to address a lot of these things, to have input from across the state. And I do think that's a good step. And we know we at least have Kevin Lemke on one of those, so those are working. I don't know if they're 5, and maybe I can get the number and what they're all focused on. That might help us know
Yeah.
at least their group's working, because I have heard some of that. And that would, then we probably have a date of when they expect to report out. And I do think those things will come. It's just we've been in it a couple months now. We've been in emergency response mode, and we haven't got answers to what the future looks like yet. And I think that's a frustration and an uncertainty for many of us. So we'll continue to push on that, because I think we can get you bits of information. I don't think we'll have a full picture for a period of time until those work groups get through that. But I know, because I've been told, they're meeting. In terms of our budget, I think what Ms. Day and I would tell you, whatever budget you choose to adopt, it would help us to know where we go 5, 10, 15, or 20. But whichever one you adopt, we're going to have to watch it, and everything lags. And so because you adopt it July 1st, we're not going to spend much, right? We're going to keep our spending pretty close. We're not going to hire. We're not going to we're not going to do these things or move forward on capital without talking to the board and saying, we feel we can spend this $500,000 because, are you comfortable with that? And I think we're going to have to do that at least through the first half of next year with whatever budget you adopt. And we may not do anything beyond just bare minimums until the fall, until we know how the world really is going and what the economy's doing. But I think that's going to be true of any budget. You have to adopt it, and then we have to monitor it closely, and we can do some monthly reporting. We can do some check-in at the work sessions every month or every other month. It doesn't change a whole lot month to month, and our revenues lag. So you adopt a budget July 1st, we're not going to have a whole lot of sense of what July revenue looks like till probably September or October. We'll know how the tax collections came in for June, sometime in July or August. So we'll have some milestones to tell you we think we're still tracking okay, but when you get into all the sales tax and all those other shared revenues, it takes a while to get that information. It's not instantaneous. And so I think whatever you adopt, we'll be very cautious through the beginning of the year until we have a sense of how things are going.
And I do appreciate that, because I do think slow and steady is the way to go. But I also do think that we have to start planning, and we also have to get to where the response is not, and hopefully with a vaccine, but there's still going to be people, people take the flu. I hear it all the time, because I get the flu vaccine every year. I never get the flu vaccine. I never get the flu. I get the flu vaccine. I get the flu all the time. So, there are going to be people that get the vaccine that it may not work. So there's going to have to be a part of the population that, when there's an outbreak, probably doesn't come out. You follow what we're doing now, where you're getting your groceries to come to you, and that's very difficult. It's very isolating. I'm hearing from people that are very isolated, very lonely. But I do think we need to start planning we need to have information, because I think without information, there becomes mistrust. And in Mr. Hipple, there was somebody that sent a picture today, Lowe's. It is packed. Good for, that's York County. They're getting that tax revenue. It is wall-to-wall people. Right. And so I think that's when people get, I had a friend tell me yesterday that they waited longer at an intersection than they have since the beginning here. So people are starting to, there's more movement getting out, and it's going to get harder and harder to hold people back. I realize there's a stay-at-home. I'm not telling anyone to not do that. I'm just saying I think we need to get as much information and plan as much as we can, because I think there's going to be a continued outlet of people moving forward.
Well, and one of the questions you ask about hospitals being ready or equipment.
Yes.
I will tell you the county's in much better shape today than we were 3 weeks ago with personal protective equipment for our first responders and our staff. So to your point, the delay has let the supply chain in that area catch up for us.
Good.
The hospitals have been on regular calls. We're sending you information about hospitals and their bed availability. It is much better in terms of their supplies. They never had a bed problem here or an ICU problem in the peninsula, but we were tracking that. They were worried about supplies. They are no longer, at least as I understand it, worried about their supplies on the medical field. So the pause and this delay has helped in all of that give us time to get ready. So I do think we are in much better shape should the number of cases rise when things reopen, and whether we have a peak in the summer or fall or whatever that might look like. I do think the medical community is much better prepared today than we were 2 months ago.
I will say, I was at.
Mr. Stevens, I'm sorry to interject. I'm having a hard time communicating, but in terms of getting businesses and everything back open, are we relying on the state to say, okay, here you go, this is what you need to do? Or are we putting plans in place here locally to what reopening would look like and then mirror that with what the state is doing? I mean, are we working on a plan to get things open currently?
Yeah, Ms. Sadler, I think, where we are is still following the state's order. So whatever the governor says, you could be more restrictive. I don't think you have the authority to be less restrictive. So I haven't sensed from this board that we wanted to be more restrictive on business openings. And so as the governor allows it across the state, we would certainly get that information out to the business community. I think they may have it before we get it, because I think they're anxious to know that as well. But we would work with them to try to make sure we're allowing all that we can under the governor's order for a reopening plan. But that's still where it's coming at this point, is from the state.
May I follow up with that
So
too?
is the state supplying you with that information now?
We are getting it at the press conferences as the public and business community is getting it.
So you're not getting anything other than the press conferences?
That's correct.
I think the governor said in his press conference yesterday that all of that information was going to be coming out, indicating how each of the particular enterprises was going to be dealing with the safety concerns, how a bowling alley versus a hair salon versus a retail store would have to operate in order to be in compliance with an opening, which I think he said would probably take place next Friday, a week from Friday.
I would follow, if I could do a quick follow-up with that. I did receive an email from a community nonprofit who was asking that they are looking for specific written guidelines just in if they get lost in the shuffle, if we can, because they are trying to plan fundraisers, those types of things for they're most of them are missing their spring fundraiser, so they're trying to work towards their fall fundraiser. What do the guidelines look like for nonprofits and things like fundraisers and donor gatherings? So I think they're looking for that from either us or from the Commonwealth. So I know business has been talked about a lot. I'm not sure, how much in the nitty gritty, but that's probably something we need to pay attention to.
Yes, ma'am. We'll be happy to reach out. I don't think it'll be specific to nonprofits. I think it'll relate more to activities. So gatherings of people is probably a bigger part for them, or how they're going to have their community meetings, how they're going to have their fundraisers. I know there's some guidance on groups of 50 at some stage. Right now we're groups of 10. So it's those kinds of things that really are coming again through the Commonwealth. We'll be happy to try to share that information and continue that with groups. If they have specific questions, I would ask them to call us. We would be happy to talk through them and try to help them understand the state requirements, because we are talking about those more often, and we talk about business an awful lot, but I think it applies to churches in the same manner. I think it applies to a lot of the nonprofit groups and probably any other activity out there that folks are wondering how do they do that, whether it's a family reunion, whether it's a wedding. All those kinds of things are going to have some criteria that are going to be driven by these phases that are being talked about and trying to keep us open but still separated a little bit and not have too large of a gathering.
Okay, thank you.
I would sort of echo that. Now, the Community Services Center over on Waller Mill has been completely closed down. Fish is closed down completely. And so a lot of other places have tried to help carry the load. As we start back into this reopening, it would be very helpful if the state could provide us with some guidance for some of these nonprofits, because some of them are essential to providing services to the most disadvantaged in our community and have not been able to do so the way they normally do. And I think they would be high on the priority list to get back operating as quickly as we can.
I do believe that will come, but we don't have it all yet. I know I heard some guidance on farmers markets and the ability to allow some of those kind of operations to resume. So I do think there are plans being developed, and we'll get that information. We just don't have it yet, but I will try to gather that list of task force that are out there for you.
One quick question. Do you expect the state to require, have you had any indication that there's going to be a requirement for a mask if you go into certain obviously a restaurant, I mean, that wouldn't work, but, a grocery store, not for a while anyway.
Well, it could work in a restaurant when you're going in.
When you're going
Obviously
in,
not
not when you're
not when
eating.
you're sitting
Yes,
at the table
that's what I
eating,
meant, yeah.
but that's where you're gonna come in contact with other people when you're coming in and going out. And so
Yeah,
forth.
so have you, and then, would that, something like that be what you're talking about if we wanted to be more restrictive? Would we be able to say, well, we're gonna require masks at grocery stores?
And yeah, I think we'd have to work with our county attorney to make sure of what we could require, but I think you could try to have things stricter than what the state is doing. I don't know that you could be less strict.
Oh, yeah,
and
but,
so-
and we don't know yet what, okay, all right.
And we don't know. I have heard conversations about more masks, but whether that'll be for the workers or whether it's for both, depending on the situation, us as consumers and where we'll have to, I think we'll have some guidance on that very soon as well.
Thank you, I'm sorry, Mr. Hill.
No, that's all right. Frustration is definitely a word's been used a lot. I think we in James City County, I'm not saying going against the governor, so don't anybody, out there think I'm talking about going against the governor. He's got his job and we have our job. Our job is James City County. His job is the state. I think we need to put a plan in place that when we're able to open, we know exactly from day one what we're gonna do, how we're gonna do it, and what we're gonna put in place. I think if we wait for Richmond, which I've sat here on this board, and we've been waiting for Richmond for quite some time, not blaming anybody in particular, but waiting on Richmond is not gonna happen. It's just not coming, it's not moving fast enough, it's not getting where we need to be. And I'm not saying that open up tomorrow, I'm saying that we need to have a plan in place of how to open, when to open, and when we get the okay, you can open totally, then we know how we want to phase it in place and publish it so the citizens know that, hey, this is what we're looking for and this is what we're going, and I think in our budget, we're gonna be at 20%, but I understand at 20% loss, there's a lot of things that are connected with that. And I can drop back off that 20, but I think that 20 is gonna be very close and drop into the 15 mark. And I would much rather have a scenario of where we're doing better come September than a scenario we've got to come back and change it again. And, with my budget at home and my budget at the office, if I see something like this, I plan for the worst and hope for the best. And I think that's what we need to do. And I think that's the smartest thing to do is plan for the worst and hope we hit better numbers than what we have, what we're planning for. And it's okay to do that. It's okay to be a little tight and be thrifty with our money. That's something that America may have to learn all over again. And this may be a good thing coming out of it. But I agree with the board and their frustration of not knowing certain things and not knowing when and all that. But I've listened to the press conferences. I've listened to what's been spoke about, and there's a little news, but it's a rerun from last time. And it's very frustrating when there should be something that said, we don't know exactly. I don't expect them to know. I don't expect them to have a crystal ball. I don't expect them to have all the answers. But I expect them to put something in place that says, this is how we're going to come out of this. And this is what we're going to do. I don't know if it's going to be tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. But these are the plans, and this is how we're coming out. We've been in it long enough. We should be putting a plan together. We should be coming out of this. We should be looking at the future. If not, we're going to be sitting here at the next meeting talking about the same thing. And doing nothing is not a way to move forward. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not saying open up tomorrow. I'm saying a slow, safe opening. But we in James City County ought to lead the communities and get a plan in place and a direction in place of how we would do it when we're able to do it. If that makes sense. We just need a plan.
Well, I think the problem with that, of course, is that we could have a plan, but all our surrounding communities might have a different plan.
That's okay. We got
No,
to
it
do
isn't.
something.
No, it isn't, because it just creates confusion. Am I in Williamsburg? Am I in York County? Am I in Newport News?
You're in James City.
Maybe when I'm trying to buy something at Lowe's, I don't know whether I'm in James City County or York County. I know, but
If we sit
a
here and do
citizen might
nothing,
not. No, I think what we fail to recognize is that in fact there have been a lot of things going on. If you asked any of the industry leaders who've been involved in these task forces that are actually going on, they'll tell you that they have been working closely with the governor and with the staff in Richmond. And part of the problem that we have with the system we have here, I know how much we were supposed to get from the CARES Act, $6.7 million. But that $6.7 million, that's NACO reported that, for James City County, it's reimbursement for expenses related to COVID. We are not likely to have $6.7 million that can be directly related to COVID, that can easily qualify. And the problem that the state's having is getting an answer from the Treasury Department on what it's going to mean to be a reimbursable expense. That's kind of the problem we're having all around this discussion, that yes, it is exceptionally uncertain. None of us know what's going on.
no, that's why I'm saying we need to plan for the worst. I'm not going to count on getting any money till we get it. I'm not counting anything coming in until we get it, because we don't know. It could be, I'm going to give you all this, and you get that little bit because this isn't done or that, and I agree.
But you can plan to open up any businesses you want, and maybe what you're going to get is what we see in the surveys that were released today that said that 82% of people said they would not feel comfortable going out to a restaurant.
And that would be fine. They don't have to go out. We're not saying because we open up, you have to go to a restaurant. We're saying you're a smart human being. Use your brain for a time period and figure out if it's safe for you to go out. But by keeping everything locked down totally, and like I say, I'm not saying open up everything. I'm not even
It's
saying
not a
necessarily-
decision we're going to be able to make.
I know, but we need to make plans of how we're going to do it when it comes. If we don't plan,
But I think that is what will roll out with this plan. If the governor is going ahead with the plan to open up next Friday.
it was this Friday, now it's next Friday.
Yes, he moved it back a
Right.
week because he looked at the data.
And then next Friday, it may be another week.
Maybe.
Yeah, so that's the uncertainty
Yeah. Right.
I'm talking about. And it's been moved several times.
And he announced plans to hire 1,000 tracers so that when people are identified as having contracted the virus, who they come in contact with is notified so that we know if there's a hot spot.
Don't you think, though, in all honesty, I'm not trying to be argumentative, and I appreciate that heads of industries are on task force, but don't you believe that some of that information should be coming to localities and Board of Supervisors? With all due respect,
I do.
I mean, that's my frustration.
Agreed.
If you're going to have a head of
agree.
industry sitting on a task force, great. But when you can't get information through VACO or VML, there's a problem. And regardless of, so the very first week I shared with you all, they were doing this conference call. We had, I told you all who all was on there. We're gonna have it the next week. Well, it's been a very long week because we've not had another one. And I just think that shows disregard for localities. And I think that's where you're getting a little bit of your push and pull here. Because I think I think information is power. And I think if we had a little bit more information, you would get some buy-in. And it wouldn't necessarily, to me, the fact that people are even suggesting this is a partisan issue is just a bunch of baloney. I don't think it's a partisan issue. I think it's that if you empower the people that are sitting here doing this meeting, and I've been on this conference call. There's a lot of talk going on about the fall. I'm feeling like but we're going blind. We're riding blind, and I'm just pleased as punch that there's industry people sitting there. But I'm a little offended that the fact that there doesn't seem to be, and maybe you're being updated because the the governor likes your party, and now, you know, and as an independent, I'm not getting that information, but I don't think that's probably the case. Yeah, I figured so. So, you know, I do think, and not to say, I know this is a busy, I mean, I get it. It's the governor, and it's very busy. But there's also,
But it's not just the governor. I mean,
There's lots of people
We
there.
are supposed to be functioning under a system where the Center for Disease Control is giving us guidance. And what do we get instead is that when they produce a report that says that we're about to see a spike of 3,000 deaths a day, that they then suddenly, are shut down. Their information isn't going to be released publicly anymore.
it's frustrating.
It's frustrating on all
on
the way
all
around.
sides.
And I think that you're exactly right, that information, sharing information, finding information is power. And I think one of the best things about today is that for all the ways in which you may feel that the emails that have come in have been maybe generated improperly or taken a very hostile tone or anything of that nature, there are people watching us today to find out a little bit more about the budget process and what's going on, and that's important. It's important for people to understand that these decisions aren't being made in a vacuum and that people are just saying, oh, well, let's cut like crazy because we don't like schools. It's important to understand the context in which we're working at. Now, I believe that we don't know a lot of things right now, and we will know things better as time goes on. We don't know what Congress is.
To your point, Mr. McGlennon, I'm sorry if I could interject, because we don't know a lot of what's going on. That's why I tend to agree with Mr. Hippel in terms of how we plan for our budget is because of the uncertainty, and as much as we want to get things open, there is still a lot of uncertainty out there. We've never been in this territory before, and I would rather be in a position of making a hard decision now with our budget, and then, God willing, as things start getting better, then we can start giving back to the schools, give back to whatever we need to contribute towards, rather than being on the low end of it. And in a few months, we go, oh, there we go, we got to cut you. And then a few more months, well, we need to cut that. And then in a few more months, well, this has been uncertain, we've got to cut that. I would rather be in a position of making a tough decision now and then give back. That's just my 2 cents worth.
I do think, though, to be honest, about making a severe cut and then getting back, they're obviously in this, white paper that we got from the schools. I mean, there are some that they would not be, in order to come back from that would be very difficult for that fiscal year. I don't think you couldn't go out in January and hire certain specialty teachers that were needed or open up Bright Beginnings larger. So I do think we have to take that in. Yeah, I think we have to consider that when we're talking about a budget impact. So
We've been at it about an hour and a half. Can we take about a 5-minute break and then come back?
Okay. Sure. It was just getting good.
back to order. And I would like to ask that if we've got continuing questions and let's go through all of that. But the idea would be we have to get to a point here where we give direction to staff on one of these options. And I think that I think everybody's been making their points and their case about how they feel it ought to go and everything. So I would like you to, if everybody have a chance to fully flesh out what they want and to make their statements, and then we'll come back and we'll do literally a poll of the board at the end to see if we can get some consensus to give direction to proceed. I will say that even after we do that, I think that the follow-on for us is going to be that a lot of things after they've gotten their direction and go rework the budget is we need to come back and take a look at some of the CIP items that staff has laid out for us, not just what they're proposing to cut, but what they're proposing to leave behind, and so that we can take a look at particular issues on an individual basis and say, do we really want to keep this one, or do we really want to cut this one, and to make some value judgments. I would propose that we probably do that at our work session on the 26th, which would give us one last opportunity to get some of the tweaks to this before we come back and adopt on June the 9th.
Will that give staff enough time?
I believe that would. I think we discussed that earlier. That would
I
give,
believe we could start the discussion, Mr. Chairman, see where we end up, but yes, ma'am.
And if I may, Mr. Eisenhower, I did want to just make one technical correction to
Sure.
the numbers so that you do have the right numbers to work with to make your decisions. Mr. Hippel, getting back to your comment on slide 8 and the grand total there under the 10% scenario, I believe we confirmed that should be the 194,428,000. The revenue figure was correct. There was a typo in the total there. The number that's incorrect in that scenario is the transfer to capital project fund. Under the 10% reduction, it shows $8,314,290. That should be $5,314,290. That is the $3 million difference. That then corrects the typo.
okay, thank you.
So,
And I believe you had the floor?
no, I don't think so. I was going to ask a question, but did you have some more
I had a
comments?
whole lot, but we took a break and I lost half of it. No, I'm just yeah, I can, there's a, in the very first presentation, slide would be slide number 1. We figured the budget is the county and the school is a 50-50 instead of a 52-48. I know it's a small technicality,
Correct.
but if we're gonna fund you at 52, then we ought to have the 52-48. And then,
That for the current year that we're finishing out?
yes.
Okay.
It is.
And it should follow through for the next, because that's what we're planning on funding as well.
Yes.
Like I say, I think we're gonna be close to the 20. I hope we're not. I see some issues with the 20 that I would say, okay, let's ease back a little bit. And, I'm pushing for 15. And, I think that's, with, correct me if I'm wrong, with the operation budget for the school, once we approve this budget, and it's in place, whether we do 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever we approve, once that money's sent to the school, that money stays at the school. If we have to change this halfway through, and this would be on the operating side, if we have to change this halfway through, the school board does not have to change it, because it's out of our hands, and it's their job to deal with their finances.
And the county attorney can weigh in on this, but I believe it all has to do with the way you appropriate it. So if you appropriate it in its entirety when you adopt the budget, then that is correct. However, you do have the option to appropriate monthly, quarterly, or some other frequency, and that would allow you to make those adjustments should we need to.
Okay, because that would be my fear, would be that if we give it all, and then we end up in a jam, And not saying anything about the school board, please, y'all don't take this the wrong way. It's just numbers. We're just working with numbers, not people, just numbers. And they've already appropriated everything. They may not be able to give anything back. It's not a want. They may not be able to. But if we hold fast to that number, whatever it is we work out, and do it monthly or quarterly or whatever, then if we have to make an adjustment in this board because we had a second scenario come up, we had something we couldn't plan for come up, it gives us that ability to move those funds and work with the school, but move those funds in order to, not like, because if we do it the way we've been doing it, and we have an issue this year or next year, and we end up with an issue, then we have to shoulder all the issue. And that's gonna put even a bigger burden on the citizens and county staff, where we're in the same house, we share the same revenues, we share the same work, the fears and the worries and all that, we should share on all of it. So I'd like to see 15, but I'd also like to see wording in there as well as far as protecting that source, and whether it's monthly or quarterly, we work within that. And if we might have to start out with monthly, and then after a quarter go to quarterly, because by then we'll know something in another quarter, we'll know a little bit more information, hopefully, than what we know now. And we're always hoping like we talked about, if we get the information, we can make better decisions. Thank you.
I did want to mention the fiscal year 21 scenarios does factor in a 52-48 split. For the fiscal year 20, it was based on the 50-50 split. The difference between the 50 and the 52 is about 150,000. So the schools would be looking at about 3.9 million, 3,972,800 versus the 3,820,000.
Okay. And every penny counts. So, thank you.
So I have not heard everybody's, so I guess I would ask first you, Ms. Day, again, to ask you, you had recommended, you and the county administrator had recommended the 5%. Is that still where you are today?
I'd be in the 5 to 10% range. I think 10% is probably a better place for us to be.
Okay.
In terms of being a little more conservative than we may think. But we won't know till it drags on, until we get reopened, until we see a month or two where we are. Ms. Day, anything different from your
I would
perspective?
agree with that, just based on the additional information we have today and hearing some of the discussions. I think that the 10% would probably be closer to where I am today.
So, and I say this with, I don't want the people that have send us an email, plus those that have not, those that have kids in the school division, to not think that we don't realize the impact, because when looking at this list, it's a very real list, and it's very, there's an increase in, there is a cost, and I hear you about, how we want the split to be. But I think we would have to admit that probably closing a park on a Sunday afternoon has a little different impact than an increase in a class size. Then a decrease in the number of students that are served in Bright Beginnings. A reduction in custodial staff, elimination of some health programs. Now, this is a decision that they get the money, they decide how to do it. This is what they've decided that, I guess, that they're going to do. No 2021 textbooks adoptions, no replacement buses. School attendance changes would be 4 in-person days, 1 virtual learning day per week. Anyway, there's a number of things here. So, it's some very real hit that our school division is going to take, going with the, but.
No, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Same time, there's not at the same time. However, we've come to a complete close in our economy. In listening to what you said prior regarding the reserve, I think you've made very valid points as to why, that would not be the right fiscal decision for James City County. But that's very tough, and I'm sure it's very tough for people to hear that may be faced with, so what would be the total decrease at 10% that the schools would be facing? Because maybe I got ahead of myself.
The 10% reduction.
11,200,000.
That's on slide 9, 11.
How much is it?
11.2 million. Another option that I don't know
That's for the schools.
that's for schools, and that is at the 52%. Another option you would have with the allocations, rather than allocating quarterly or some interval, is you could do your split between operations and CIP differently. Because their CIP budget, we fully appropriate as part of the county budget. You could withhold more of that as well as part of the reduction and have a smaller impact on the contribution to the school division for operations. It's just another option you would have
Let me
available.
ask one other question, because this idea of appropriating other than the whole year, either monthly or quarterly or whatever, go down, quarterly sounds good. Would this be, it would seem that this would be something that we would not necessarily want to just do strictly for the schools. It might be something that we would want to do for ourselves. To basically say, all right, well, we know we're going to pick up a number, and then we're going to say, all right, we're going to look at the first quarter, we're going to appropriate that money, then we're going to come back and look at it on a monthly basis, and then at the end of that, where we have to appropriate for the next quarter, we make the tweak. So you basically would get bites at the apple. How would that affect county operations, pro or con? And is it something we can do? I mean,
I might have to think through that some for me. And on the school side, I do need to talk with the superintendent and see if appropriating quarterly affects anything she does in terms of staffing. I don't know when they're entering into teacher contracts. Is that a year commitment? And if you only appropriate quarterly, does that create a problem for them entering into that year-long contract? And I don't know. Maybe you have to appropriate some significant percentage of the budget, but you could hold a 5 or 10% if you're concerned about revenue. So maybe you appropriate 90% with the commitment you'll give the other 10. I just don't know. So I need some time on that side. On the county side, you can amend our budget every time you meet. So I don't, whether you did that as a quarterly, an annual appropriation or otherwise, if you ran out a quarter or something happened and we didn't meet, it would stop our operations. So I think it makes it a little less certain for us to, employees, to give them reassurance and us be able to provide the service. I think it would be odd to do that, but it's not impossible, and I think we'd figure out the logistics of it. But I would tell you, every time you meet, if you had concerns that we were doing something, you can always unappropriate funds to the county. So in terms of what you appropriate to the school, you have to give them, as I understand it. What you appropriate to the departments, you can take away at your next meeting.
I think that the important question, since the bulk of theirs is their personnel, the question that we really need to have answered is how we could do some sort of appropriation difference and not adversely affect their personnel policies, their contracts, their ability to set up for the school year, because it would put them in a real box if we said we're going to appropriate a quarter and they contracted all these teachers, and then we come in and say, oh no, we're going to cut half of that out. And now they've got contracts that they've signed with teachers. It would create, I think, a legal dilemma for them and for us. So the county administrator or county attorney wants to weigh in on that or not.
I did want to say there are certain things that have to be appropriated in their entirety. For example, our debt service payments on our annual basis, it's required by those bond covenants that be appropriated in full as part of your budget every year. I do know most contracts have a stipulation in them that it's subject to appropriation. I don't know if that applies to personnel contracts or not. I do know it applies to most of our procurement contracts for other goods and services.
And we can change our budget whenever the board desires.
Absolutely.
So if we approve a budget, that doesn't mean that we have to stick with that all year long. The only thing I was saying with the schools is, once given, it's theirs, which is their job, that's their duties, so it leaves us in a spot that if something happens, then it's all the brunt is gonna fall on James City County, not the school system, even though we're in the same house. But then I look at that, if that does happen, the next big item that I have to pick off is police, fire, EMS, and all that, because that's our next biggest budget. That's the next hit. And that's what I'm trying to protect, is make sure that, you know, we plan for the worst and hope for the best. And so I've got to protect that section of my budget with this other in it. And, you know, maybe a year or two until we get through this to figure this out and go back to normal daily lives. But I don't want to let that money go over, and then all of a sudden now I'm trying to ask for it back, and they're like, we can't now. This is the time to plan for, is now, not wait till later and say, we're in a jam, we gotta have it back. Because it's not gonna happen.
Yeah, Mr. Hill, I will say that today, and I hope a year from now, that we'll still have a very good relationship with the superintendent and her CFO. I would tell you, they have been very good in our conversations in the current year, and understanding that we need them to help where they can. And while we may not be able to make them do it, they have been very participatory this year in trying to reduce their costs just this year, that will help return some money, I believe, to the county. So, and that's been a very cooperative effort. And again, I don't know all the details, but we've had enough conversations to know that I believe their year is going to end below where they thought, and we'll be a little better off because of their efforts. And so I do think we have a really good working relationship with the school superintendent and her CFO, and I think that will continue.
Mr. Stevens, do we know when they're planning to reopen schools? Do we have any guidance on that?
Ms. Sadler, I've not heard on when they plan to reopen this year, not, but they're still doing some education virtually. I don't know what the fall is yet. I think the hope is that they'll reopen in the fall, but I don't know if that's been confirmed as being absolute yet or not. But I expect they'll find a way to teach, whether they have kids in class or not, because those kids are still aging and still need to be progressing as we go along so that they're ready when their time comes.
I'm just here to say my grandchildren need to be in school. Can I just put that out there?
Yes, ma'am.
So I guess I would be interested in looking at a CIP, a bigger CIP reduction rather than on the school side, and see what we can do to get some more money on the operating side. And then I would be interested in some type of forecasting. So if we do a 10%, and let's say we aren't able to make up much this year, which I hope is not the case. I hope we start to see a turnaround. And but what does that look like? Because that's just going to get us, as was said at the last meeting, schools with the Commonwealth are still not caught up. They're 2009. You know, really, you know, I realize that it's our community, but this is not where the state has not stepped in. This localities, I realize it's not to what the school board would like, but the localities have stepped in and stepped up. It is time like this that the Commonwealth needs to also stand with us and help bridge some of this gap, and perhaps they will. But that said, they're still being funded at 2009, so now something like this is a big hit, which is going to push them further back. So what does the forecast look like, not only on the school side for catching up, but on our side for catching up? When can we expect, you know, it will truly never be whole because we'll be trying to, you know, but can we get some sort of forecast to say, if we make it all of fiscal year 2021 without a closure, we get visitation back, which we know 21 will be a little slower than 22, you know, when does it look like we might start to recoup some of this. I think that would help as well. So we have some idea about our long-term financial outlook. So,
Right, and I know I've had ongoing conversations with the schools, not only about our reductions, but they're starting to get new estimates from the state. And of course, some of the numbers they originally included in their proposed budget from the state have since gone down. So their budget continues to be hit not just from the local impact, but also from their state and federal impact. I can tell you of the last 2 weeks in working with the school division, and again, we had fully funded our appropriation in fiscal year 20. We've asked for 3.8, now 3.9 million or so back. Of that amount, they've already returned $2 million in the last 2 weeks. So I think that shows the good faith effort on their part and just the collaboration between the two boards to do their part in that. We also pay our appropriation to the school division on a cash reimbursement basis. So although we appropriate about 52% of our budget, we don't pay that full amount in July. We pay that monthly as needed to cover their expenses. So typically in the summer months, and of course we're in a downturn right now, their payroll and some of their expenses are less. And so the reimbursement to them will also be less. When school starts getting revved back up, the demand on their cash tends to go up as well. So we are able to hang on to that cash, earn the interest, and only reimburse them as their expenses are actually coming in. And that does help us from a cash flow standpoint.
So I know that one of the items that we expect that they will include in a reduced budget would be an elimination of the raises that were planned for this year. That's a fairly significant amount of money.
Correct.
Right? And in some sense, that's money we know is not going to be available in all likelihood for this year.
And I believe that was about $3 million.
$3 million. So that, I mean, in some sense, that should give us some comfort when we start to add that with the capital projects, the ability to see that they would have full staffing of the schools seems.
I think that the hard part is that we already know that there's a downward, teaching isn't on an upward swing. It's teachers are going through a burnout, and there's not as many young people that are wanting to be teachers. And when you have something like this where, education takes a hit, there's not raises when you're already underpaid, it's just very real. It's
Believe me, I know that.
yeah. So, it's not just, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not just this year, it's a pebble into a lake, and it far-reaching consequences of something like that. And I don't think anybody on this board is unaware of that, so.
Sue, you want to sum up?
There, Sue?
Sue, are you there?
Sorry, I'm having technical issues here.
Okay.
I don't know. This is so difficult. With not even knowing when school's going to start back. I think it's at least 85% of their budget, if I'm not mistaken, is for salaries. Believe me, I want the kids back in school, and I want to see things up and running because that's where our kids need to be. With not knowing if they're even going to open in the fall, and I know they'll be doing virtual stuff from home, but I don't think the expenses are the same as, with doing things at home and, with the operations of the school and everything. The whole thing is just very frustrating. I'll just add that. I just wish we had a little more direction, with the unknowns, and that's part of the frustration. It's the unknown, and we're trying to step up and make this hard decision, and I'm hoping we just, we can make it one time, and then, and to Mr. Hippel's point, if the schools are fully funded and they don't open, and then what if something happens to where some, there's another event, and then our budget gets hit more. I'm just concerned that once we fund something, when you fund something like that, we can pull back. I just don't know that they can, and that's my biggest concern. And it has not, like they said, it has nothing to do with people, kids, anything. I'm just looking at numbers, and that's just the real facts that we're dealing with. That's what a budget is, and those are the real facts we're dealing with. So those are my frustrations right now, and I'm sure it's everyone's as well. So that's all I got for now. Thanks.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and I just want to piggyback on something Ms. Sadler just said, because I recognize that, the question of the burden falling on us is a pretty significant one. And I just say that we can't really cut back very much, because we did. I mean, this is not the first ride on this particular fiscal crisis. It's a different kind, because it's one which potentially could snap back much more quickly, or we don't really know what the impact will be, and that which is really the frustration that everybody has here. But we never expected the recession to last as long as it did in terms of an impact, because it hit our property values. And that meant that ultimately we had to go and ask the taxpayers to let us raise the tax rate so that we could collect the same amount we had been collecting in most instances, 4, 5, 6 years earlier, because property values had dropped so much. So that was a really prolonged situation, but we really reduced our staff significantly. And we haven't really grown it much since then. And we've got a lot more citizens than we had then, probably another 12, 15,000 people living in the county. I think we stretch our staff pretty far. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that our county employees are often asked to do an awful lot, and they respond greatly. But it's not going to be easy to say, well, we'll just ask somebody else to do more than they were doing before. I'd like to follow the recommendation of staff and the administrator now to plan for the 10%. One of the reasons I do that is because, not to be crass about it, but this is an election year for the presidency, and there are efforts underway to help local governments and state governments deal with revenue loss at the national level. One of the things they could do, frankly, is just take the money that they've already appropriated and say it can be used for revenue replacement as well as reimbursement for COVID expenses. $6.7 million coming to us would be a pretty significant amount. And they're not paying attention to James City County. There are jurisdictions all over the country that are going to be in much worse shape than we are. And states that are going to be critical to the election are going to be much more concerned. And frankly, it's going to turn out one way or another that we'll see aid to state and local governments coming as a result of an effort to influence the election or as the result of the election. So I just think that we can't know everything. We can't make a lot of the decisions that we would like to be able to make, and frankly, we shouldn't really feel very comfortable about making a lot of those decisions because they are public health decisions, and we don't have that background, and we don't have that staff. But we do have the ability to try to influence some decisions, and among those decisions are to say, let's see what we can do to put pressure to get some more assistance for us from places where it can come. Let's see what we can do to strategically plan this budget so that we're in the best position we can be in to respond. While I think Mr. Hipple makes a great point about the idea of planning for the worst and then being happy if things get better than that, we also have to recognize that when you're dealing with agencies and governments where the primary expenses are personnel, those do have sort of longer lasting commitments that have to be in place. I think recognizing that in this environment, we would like to be able to give raises to teachers and to county staff. We're not in a position to be able to do that at the moment, and that's a big chunk of money that was put into these budgets that, you know, is going to be something that we can turn to and just say, we will do our best to make that up. And I know that people will say, well, you said that before, and I think we have actually, but, in many instances, but I would feel more comfortable with sort of looking at where we are later in the month, planning on a 10%.
Okay. This brings me back to my military days where we were told repeatedly with budget cuts at the federal level that our goal was to do more and more with less and less until ultimately we were qualified to do everything with nothing. And there are a lot of unknowns. And I think what we have to do is we have to do due diligence with the best professional estimates. I don't want to use the word guess, but estimates that our people can give us, the staff, and we've heard their recommendation of 10%. I would like to point out that if you look at that slide we were talking about on page slide 9, where it does the expenditures for the county and for the school division at a 52-48 split across, and it has operations and capital. You notice that for us at the county, we have a CIP that starts out with a significant hit starting at the 10%. At the 15 and the 20%, it really gets significant. And that there's like between the 10 and 20% range, there's like a $4 million decrease. I think we always have the ability with the CIP to go back and say, all right, we're going to take the 10%, it's 3.4 million, 3.3 million. We need more. You got another 4 million out there that you could take just from the CIP. We could look at the CIP. So that gives us the ability to do that without having quite as an adverse impact on operations. I note that at the schools have put their capital CIP at, their total CIP is about 7.2 million for this FY21. They've started out with about 3 million right at the very first. And then they go to about not quite 4 million. And then they stay the same. And where they are taking the hit beyond 10% is in their operations, which is their 85%, their personnel. But they still, again, do have about 3 million in CIP that we could be looking at. So between the two, you got about another $7 million. Now I'll come back to one other thing that sort of really made an impact on me, and that was this estimate of what tourism impact is of about $16 million. And that's really, to me, a really worst case. This is going to go on forever and ever, you know, for the whole year. A 10% reduction is $21 million, $21.5 million, of which a large part of that would be in revenue, would be the tourism. So it seems to be reasonable that if we have any kind of somewhat recovery in the second half of the year of tourism, not total, but even partial, that we would be in better shape. And so I think that 10% figure, especially with the ability to deal with the CIP going forward, would be where I would be very comfortable with. And I must tell you that I know there's some angst about the emails we've been getting. I understand people being concerned about it in the community. I think they have to understand that our staff, our board, and the school administration and the school board have really worked in good faith. And as an example of that, it's already appropriated, FY20 money. They've got about $3.5 million worth of FY20 money already on the table. And that meant that they were willing and able to come to the table and deal with us to deal with the issue. So I know there's some concerns about you appropriate it. I think we have to give them some credit for understanding the impact for the community and being team players, if you will, on that. So bottom line for me is I would be comfortable at the 10%, because I think we have with the ability to maybe deal with how we appropriate, or especially with the ability to deal further with the CIP as we go forward. It would give us the ability to do incremental without having to adversely affect some of our more critical areas. And specifically, I think in the schools, if you are talking about going beyond 10%, you're talking about reduction in force. And when you do that, the ability to recover mid-year is very questionable. So I would almost prefer to take the 10% at that point, so that there's a known factor for them, and then if we have to deal with anything else, deal with it. Okay, everybody's had a chance. I think at this point what we need to do is to have each board member tell us their preference for 5, 10, 15, or 20, and give some consensus guidance to the administration on how to go. So would you like to start out, Sue?
Okay, we're breaking in and out. Go ahead, let me get my stuff adjusted here because I'm cutting in and out.
Okay.
And just follow up and ask, I would hope that the school board too would try to help us with the communication piece about the reserves. Hopefully you've had that discussion with Renee.
Yes, and Renee understands just because she's in the same field as I am, so.
Okay, well,
yes.
hopefully, Ms. Ewing could speak with Dr. Herron, and that could be a point made at their meeting that we did discuss this, the request made to us from several citizens regarding that, and why that is not the recommendation. So I'm sorry, Ms. Sadler, if you want to go.
Hey, Sue, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Just to clarify, Sharon, did you say that we could appropriate some portion of school funding? I just want to make sure that I was hearing that correctly, on a quarterly or some other basis. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, you could choose to appropriate your local contribution in the operating budget to the school division on a basis other than annual. So monthly, every 2 months, quarterly, semi-annual.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time hearing. Go ahead.
And I believe the amount of so we contribute about $112 million, and of that, about $15 million is debt service. That we have to pay. That would need to be fully appropriated. But the remaining amount, that's the $98 million, could be appropriated quarterly or monthly or whatever frequency you'd like to do.
But that assumes that they could issue contracts without having appropriated funds.
Correct.
Yeah, I need to make sure with the
So
superintendent
how
what
do
that
you
does.
quarterly appropriate when you have contracts that you're dealing with? That's my confusion. I don't know how you do that.
Because the contracts are, they're connected to the appropriation. If the appropriation's there, the contract's there. If the appropriation is not there, then the contract wouldn't exist. You can still have a contract, which we do in James City County, and with appropriations connected to it. So it's basically saying, okay, we can enter into a contract with backing that is appropriated for this contract, which the funds would be appropriated. And, and the county administrator would have to get with the superintendent and go over and see if there's any items that wouldn't work or would work, and it may be, a percentage of what is held and what's not held. We'd have to work that out at the next meeting. We wouldn't be able to, seeing that we don't know how it would affect the school, and we don't want to, do anything that'll affect the school in a way. But we also have to remember that, we're watching out for everyone's money. And we're just making sure that everything's in place, that we need to, and ask these questions. And I want the general public to know that these questions are hard to ask because they're connected with human lives. It's not an easy question to ask of, if we cut this or we move that. Every one of these board members struggle and fight with, I'd hate to ask this question because it's connected with so many good things we do. But the best manager in the world without funds cannot manage anything. So it's the funds that give us the ability to manage what we have. So without funds, we cannot manage. And I personally went through it in 2008 when the economy went down, trying to figure out what's going on. There are people right now, I've been fortunate to be okay right now. But there are people right now in our community that are struggling, and I see them every day. And I'm gonna get on a little tangent just for a second. Please bear with me. There are, he's gonna hit me with the gavel in a minute. There are companies that are shutting down production, have already shut down production. And I'll just take one, for instance, chickens. They killed 2 million chickens the other day. Now, 2 million out of all that we use is not a great deal, but 2 million is a lot of chickens. Out of those 2 million chickens, to get that back into operation, that's 9 months at the least to get that chicken either laying an egg or ready to eat. So it's not something when we turn a switch back on, it's going to come back tomorrow. It's going to be a year at least coming at us, even if we open the doors partially, not all, partially, tomorrow. It's still going to be a long time getting through this because, and I'll give you one example, I know most of the board members have heard it, a mortar plant that was making mortar closed down for 1 week, had to come back and put double shift on and open back up because demand had dried, or their inventory was sold out because everybody got nervous about, we're not building any more houses. But everybody said, oh my gosh, they're closing down. We might have to get to, 3 weeks they're working double shifts to get back to where they were. And so the companies that have closed down and now all the product is drying up, when we reopen, it's going to take a while to get the American chain moving again and get it operating and get these products back out there on the line for us. So, we're going to have to think about that as well in these scenarios and what we're dealing with, because that's the other wave that's going to catch us that we can't, there's no way we can get the crystal ball out and know what it's going to be. But those are the things I'm seeing across the United States and worldwide that I'm watching, small little things like that are going to be connected to this budget. And that's why I'm looking at the 15%. I'll work on whatever we decide because we decide together. But I'm pushing for the 15%, and if we do better, we do better. If we don't have to come back and cut anything else. So that's just my 2 cents, and I'm gonna be quiet, sir.
Well, thank you for offering that. I think with the thought of we don't know what our small business impact is going to be. We don't fully know what our tourism impact is going to be. Because of that uncertainty, I tend to agree with you and making the hard choice now to go with the 15%. And then, Lord willing, I pray that everything starts to pick back up. I would rather err on that tough decision now. And as I said before, when we start getting more in and we start seeing better recovery, and put money back, give money back to the schools and give money back to where, in our own budget or wherever we deem that we need to put it, I err more on making that hard decision now, as much as I hate to say it, and then in adding to it as we improve and as we recover. So because of that, I hate to say it, I'm leaning more towards that hard decision of 15% right now.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm gonna lean towards the 10.
Okay.
I'm not convinced that it's not going to be. So I would, I want the idea of the check-in so that if there is, if we see something even next month that we're getting a read that this is taking another downward turn, that we're gonna have to do an adjustment prior to July 1. Because like my colleagues, I agree. I'm not convinced. I'm worried. The longer this goes on, the longer there's not a plan. I'm very concerned. At the same time, I want to save a piece of optimism, and I'm going to take your recommendation. It's all on you, Ms. Day.
It's all on her.
It's all on you. But fully saying that if we need to go to 15, I will go to 15. So, but at this juncture, I'm at 10. But if something doesn't turn around soon, we will be at 15 or worse very quickly. So that's where I'm at.
So we don't have the ability to control a lot of the things we've been talking about. We don't decide whether the schools will open in September, and neither does our school board in all likelihood. The decision to close the schools was a state decision, not a local decision. We don't know what the economy is going to be like. There are some things we can do, though, and one of the things we can do is to encourage our residents to practice the kind of behavior that has a better chance of avoiding a serious increase in the spread of the disease again in the fall. Wearing masks, hygiene, distancing, avoiding unnecessary trips into crowded places. All of that's a very good thing to do, and it's something we can encourage people to do on our WADA buses and in many other ways. But I do think that we have to deal with this kind of cold, hard reality that there's definitely not going to be as much money as we had anticipated in our budget. And it will be helpful to know where we will be. And so I think that we will get more information in the coming weeks before our June 9th decision has to be made. But for planning purposes, I think we will do a good job of positioning ourselves, whether we have to move in one direction or the other, to plan on the 10% and then see where we go from there.
Here's 15. And I can go again. And
Say it again.
don't give him another chance. And I've already, made my case. I would prefer 10. So I think I think the guidance to the staff would be to do 10%. I think that it's very clear that that's a first shot. I think that the check-in as we get more information on a regular basis is an essential part of what the board needs to be looking at. I would say that on the 26th, our work session, I would like to dedicate a significant amount of time to an examination of items on the CIP so that we can, and I think staff will have the ability to give us that detailed information beforehand so you can look at the individual items that are proposed to come off and the ones that are proposed to come on. And if you have questions, we can get questions of staff asked and take a look at what changes we might want to make on that going forward. And that leaves us, I think, adequate time, I hope, for the option on the so.
Ask Ms. Day a question. At what point would you, so let's say we got down to, I mean, it was worse than 15. We were at, would there be at any point that you would say, now is the time for us to get into that reserve?
Yes, there would definitely be circumstances I would make that recommendation to county administration to obviously run up the line. I don't know if it's a percentage as much as it is the impact and how long we may think something's going to go on,
Okay.
what line items we're seeing it happen in. One of the things that we're monitoring daily is the state revenue. We've kind of factored in what we think on meals tax and sales tax and lodging tax. We haven't really reduced the state revenues at all. And I know there's been years when the state was faced with difficult times, they started making reductions to the localities. The local aid to the Commonwealth was a good example. They reduced comp board funding. I've seen them do that. We got estimates yesterday on our comp board funding, and it was about a $26,000 decrease. So it wasn't significant, and it was because the states removed the 2% raise that they had in their budget, but that is less revenue to us. So that's something I don't know today that could impact the figures that we've presented. I will say when we start looking at CIP at the next work session, I think it would be beneficial for you to have the projects that are pay-go versus debt funding. Mainly what was offered tonight are those pay-go projects. So although, for example, the schools did request $7.1 million in projects, only 3.8 are pay-go, and that's why those numbers are different.
Okay.
For every $1 million we borrow, there's about $100,000 of debt service. So if I present that information to you that way, you could still take away a project that's funded with debt proceeds and know how much you're going to save. It's not going to be dollar for dollar. If we borrow $3 million, we don't save $3 million. We save $300,000. So I think that's also an important distinction when you're making the 5, 10, 15, 20% scenarios and how much we may need to take for our operations versus CIP. Same goes for the county. For example, we had planned to borrow for our fire station, that new fire station number 6. If that is deferred or delayed, that will give us some savings that today we haven't factored in because we only factored in pay-as-you-go projects. So those are some other things that you can discuss when you get those additional details from us.
I just asked the county administrator, you've been in regular conversation with the chief administrative officers. What's happening in the other localities?
Yeah, I think similar discussion, a lot of unknown, a lot of frustration with not having the path forward. Most are a mix of giving raises or not, because most of them published budgets ahead of us and really had a pre-COVID budget because it didn't exist at all when they put it out. Many are still saying they're going to try to honor raises. Some have pulled those back. It's been in the 5 to 10% range for those that have talked about their budget adoptions and compared to their pre-COVID budget. So we're not in a terribly different place. I would say we're probably, the ones I've heard for sure have been 5% numbers, a couple leaning towards the 10% range. And I think we'll know more in the coming month as they start adopting budgets. I think York's budget was to be adopted, I think today. I need to verify that, but it seems like that was going today. And I think Neil was at a 5% reduction for York County. But it's still a lot of unknowns, and all are saying whatever they adopt, they're going to have to monitor and make sure the revenues support what they've put in place.
All right. I think we are down to board requests and directives, and I have something to read before we do this. At the board's meeting on April 14th, 2020, a motion was made to appoint Brandon Nice to a term with the Economic Development Authority that would expire on March 31st, 2021. It's come to our attention that this would be to fulfill the remaining portion of an unexpired term, so the expiration date should instead be May 31st, 2021. I'll entertain a motion to amend Mr. Nice's term to expire on May 31st, 2021, instead of March 31st, 2021.
So moved.
Okay, Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Board requests and directives. Sue, do you have anything you would want to put out?
Yes, I think Chris Johnson, he may still be there. I wanted him to share some information about some help towards small businesses. Scott, is he still there? Is this a time for him to do this?
Yes, ma'am, it would be appropriate time, and Mr. Johnson is here.
Mr. Johnson, if you would come up and.
If I do it from here with the amount of paper I have to
Absolutely.
stand 6 feet away from the podium.
Absolutely.
Bit of a juggling act that I prefer not to do. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Mr. Stevens. At Mr. Stevens' request, I've done some analysis, some investigating into what our surrounding localities, other localities on the peninsula have been doing in response to the pandemic with relief for small business. As many of you know and have read in the papers, the city of Williamsburg last Thursday, City Council adopted a COVID-19 business grant program that would be funded with $1 million from their tourism development fund. The program established both general and loss criteria for business qualification, with the general criteria being that businesses must be located inside the city with local ownership or having paid all their current tax obligations, with the loss criteria being that criteria to be met by business must be subject to the governor's order closing all non-essential business or have demonstrated a significant mitigation measure such that their April 2020 gross receipts were at least 50% of what their receipts were in April of 2019. Those grants would be awarded through their Economic Development Authority, and they are on a first-come, first-served basis. Program requirements, from my conversations with staff, there's some liberal language in there that allow most any business in the city to qualify for that program. Just for some numbers, just for comparison's sake between the city and James City, the city has roughly 800 business licenses, where James City County has 5,400. So to take a program of that size and scale it to what we currently have here in James City County obviously presents a number of questions and challenges, in addition to the obvious funding question. City of Newport News and the City of Hampton, both in the past couple of weeks, their city councils and EDA have put forward money to the tune of $500,000, one in the City of Newport News for resiliency grants, and in the City of Hampton with forgivable loans, both with a unique set of qualifications and criteria, but very few restrictions on how those funds would be used. One other program of local note, as you've seen in the past couple of days, we sent information out about what the Greater Williamsburg Partnership has done in coordination and partnership with the Williamsburg Community Foundation to create a Greater Williamsburg Small Business Relief Fund in partnership with the EDAs of James City County, York County, and Williamsburg, who established seed money to that fund of $10,000 split between the three localities, which in the past 10 days has been met with an equal match from Chesapeake Bank and matches from several of the Williamsburg Community Foundation trustees, to where that fund now has over $30,000 established to be giving out as forgivable loan grants administered through the Virginia 30-Day Fund to Greater Williamsburg businesses in the three localities. The 30-Day Fund was established by an alum of the College of William and Mary, Pete Snyder. In the 3 weeks since that fund was launched by Mr. and Mrs. Snyder, the Virginia 30-Day Fund has raised more than $800,000 across the Commonwealth to provide direct financial assistance to over 135 businesses throughout the Commonwealth, including several here in James City County. So the amount of money that was created in the local fund, administered through the Community Foundation, is passed through and distributed to the Virginia 30-Day Fund, who process all of the applications, evaluate those applications, and make all the payments directly to businesses. As a stand-up program, they do that, the evaluation within 3 days. So those businesses who have been recipients of those funds receive $3,000 in forgivable loans in a very short period of time. Obviously, $3,000 on the scale of what businesses are seeing is still a relatively small amount of money, but every little bit helps in addition to those funds that have been made available through federal programs, through the SBA, EIDL loans, as well as paycheck protection loans.
I actually saw some news coverage on that on the south side, I believe. And I think there were a couple of businesses that, I realized $3,000 isn't a lot of money. It did get, it paid somebody's payroll and kept them open. So,
In combination with the variety of fund sources, grant funds available for workforce development centers, the federal loan programs, local grant programs, locality funded programs, every little bit helps. Every business out there is looking and searching for the answers and the way to bridge that gap between now and the unknowns that you all have been discussing here for the past few hours. But just to give you just a sampling of what's out there and what our neighbors are doing, happy to answer any questions about those or any other questions you might have.
are we,
So Chris, after talking to you today, I think I have been in discussions with Chris about what possibly we could do from James City County to help some of our small businesses because, they give, they invest in us, and, I think it's it's a good positive move for us to help them as much as we can. It helps preserve jobs, and, we're out, like Mr. Hippel said, we're already starting to hear of some closures, and that just, it breaks everyone's heart. We don't want to hear of that. In some of the phone calling that was done today, we did find out that if James City County were to want, and I understand that the city is doing what they're doing with $1 million, it may be a lot more cumbersome because of our size to do something of that nature here. But if we were to do something with the Virginia 30-day fund, like Chris was just talking about, if we were to make a donation of, say, $500,000, that would be money going to 166 businesses, if my math is correct. And from the phone calls that we made today, it was determined that if we donate to this fund, it absolutely can go to James City County businesses. That designation can be there. Can you confirm that for me, Chris?
Yes, Ms. Adler, that's correct. Just as the destination grant funds established through the partnership between Greater Williamsburg Partnership and Williamsburg Community Foundation carry with it a destination attachment, that those funds through that sum of money be directed exclusively to businesses in the Greater Williamsburg Partnership area between the three localities. If the board authorizes any funds to be contributed as a donation to that same local program, the board can establish criteria that money be exclusively for the use of businesses in James City County. So while the fund itself is one that is for the entire Commonwealth, different groups, public and private partners that are contributing donations to that fund can establish criteria with which that money can be disseminated to local businesses.
How many businesses?
Mr. Stevens, could you explain how we would be, how we might be able to do that from our budget?
Before that, can I ask a real quick question? How many businesses did you say we were talking about? 16?
166.
166.
With the sum of money that Ms. Sadler mentioned as an example, the $3,000
Okay,
forgivable
I was
loans
wondering
to
how you
each
got to
business.
166. Okay, because we got 5,400 businesses. Basically, if you said we're going to do $3,000, it would be 166, and we'd have to have some criteria by which we would have to be able to determine who would be competitive for that.
Correct. Just
Okay,
in
I'm
terms
sorry.
of
I just wanted
examples
to,
between
I
the
wanted to make
city's
sure I understood
program.
that number. I'm sorry, Sue. Go ahead.
Yes, Ms. Sadler had asked about how we would fund that if the board would choose to move forward. Be more difficult in FY21 with all the discussions we've had. If we fund it now and pay it now, Ms. Day and I would work through. I think we have enough going on this year that savings in the current year, we could likely pull it from something and give you a path forward that wouldn't get into our fund balance. Ultimately, if things don't track as well as we believe this year is going to end, with what the reduction we have already shown, if they're worse, it could have an impact on fund balance. But I think we could present something to you at your next meeting that would give you a path that the likely scenario would take away from something in the current year, and not impact your fund balance. Because we didn't plan for this early in the year.
Yeah, I would be
But I think we
interested
can
in
adjust.
hearing about that for this year, because I think it's something that businesses are in critical need of now. If a small amount, like Ms. Larson was saying, can make a huge difference in keeping a business open, then I think that's something that, and as Chris mentioned to me today, businesses are hurting now, and we want to help any way we can to keep anybody from having to close.
So I'll just tell you that I would be very reluctant to turn over money to an outside organization. I think we've got to be accountable for the expenditure that we would make in this particular instance. If we were going to do something like it, 166 out of 5,400 is not a huge impact, and I think it might be possible to do something a little bit more targeted. For instance, if you wanted to say we wanted to do something to help the tourism industry, which has been particularly hard hit, and maybe as an aspect of that, restaurants and motels and hotels, maybe a program to provide grants for sanitization of those facilities. Those are expenses they're going to have to deal with as they open up for customers, and it might be possible to extend it to a larger group of such establishments if you were going to do something like that. But I'd be very reluctant to turn the money over to an outside organization when there's relatively few businesses that are going to be impacted by it. In general, I wonder what the source of that money is going to be and why it wouldn't be better off just rolling into next year's budget.
I would like
Well,
to.
the problem I see with that, and I hear what you're saying about the tourism industry, and I don't know if it can be designated for those types of businesses to say greatly affect our locality. For us to be able to do anything like that, to create it on our own, we would run into the same problem that we were having with trying to mirror what the city of Williamsburg is doing. It's not an easy task to create the mechanism in which to do it. It's pretty intense. So this particular program is already in place, and it's helping. I know the NAACP up in Fairfax, I believe there was money designated to some of their businesses that they wanted designated to. We could certainly look in to see if we could designate it to tourism related businesses here, but they already have it in place. They've already got the application and the criteria in which you have to apply. So rather than tying up a lot, I know Chris was looking at what the city is doing, and it was like, that's a lot of work. So just to put it out there, it's something that I feel very strongly and passionately about, that I want to help businesses in whatever way we can. And rather than reinventing the wheel, I think we should strongly take a look at this program that they already have established. And like I said, it's going through GWP and the Williamsburg Community Foundation. That's where it lands. Then they have to have a mechanism in which to. Chris, did you pass that paperwork out to everybody?
Yes, he did.
Well,
Let me throw one other thing out here that I would like to maybe have the county administrator. I'll defer to our representative on the Tourism Council as well. But one of the issues that we've had in the past has been the maintenance of effort money. There's been a tremendous amount of money. It's almost $2 million coming from localities for maintenance of effort that is sort of legislated.
not sorta, it is.
Well, I don't know how much they've been using with their operation the way it is, but I think it would be worthwhile reaching out to them to see if they thought it might be in the community's best interest if some of that money could be put toward our tourism industry to try to help our tourism industry, because our annual contribution to that is $740,000, and that would be a source, I think, of some funding that, if there is a willingness on the part of the tourism council and our tourism industry to maybe look at some of that money being used potentially for a program like this, that would be tremendously helpful. I think it's something that we need to ask and research.
Well,
What worse they're going to say is no.
well, let's be clear, that money goes to the Alliance.
Yes, I
So
know.
the Tourism Council does not get a vote on that. The Tourism Council has gotten one amount of money from that maintenance of effort. It is sitting in an Alliance checking account. It's being used for some Alliance expenses as well. So, I mean, I certainly don't mind reaching out and asking the question about that and following up and seeing where they are. But it is, I mean, just to be very clear, it is in the legislation that has to continue. So I'm not sure of all that.
I'm not suggesting that we not donate it. I'm suggesting
If they
that
were to turn
that
around
we
and-
ask them to see if they would be willing to contribute part of it to this effort.
Okay.
Which would be in the best interest of the business community and our tourism community.
So, okay, I'll be happy to follow up on that. So would you, so it sound, there are some things to, I mean, we know the Williamsburg Community Foundation is very reputable, and Greater Williamsburg Partnership is involved. I would be interested, I will follow up with this. I'd be interested to see what numbers that you might come up with, just to see if this is something feasible. To Supervisor McGlennon's point, I know that I'm trying to remember what I was watching yesterday about the cost of hand sanitizer, mask, that kind of thing in getting businesses up and running. And may mean that they can't do that because they've been closed and they don't have the cash on hand. So I don't know if we really want to get that much into their business, and I don't even know if that's anything that they'd be willing to entertain. And I hear you about, 166 businesses out of 5,400 isn't a lot, but like I said, from what I saw, I mean, there were some businesses that this literally did keep able to go. I think there could be a grant that's given, and then unfortunately, the business doesn't make it anyway. That's a risk. But goodness knows, I think it's very evident that businesses are hurting. And if you need any firsthand experience stories, see me after the meeting. So
I would be fine with it and look at the different options of how it could be funded. And I hear what you're saying, John, on, it's a small amount, but it is an amount that almost reminds me of that tale of the guy walking down the beach and throwing the starfish in, and there were millions on the beach, and the guy stopped and said, "Do you think that makes a difference?" He said, "Well, it did to him." So, it may be that one company that, it does make a difference to. There might be some that are going to close down, and we can't do them all, which would be nice if we could give a little bit to everyone. But as we've just discussed, we might be limited on funds to begin with. And so we just have to do the best we can with what we have and hope we make a difference.
All right, I only had one thing to add, and I would I keep close track on this because I've had a lot of folks in my district ask me about it. That is that 5 weeks ago, when we started this, I think I mentioned at one of our meetings that we had we were less than 1% of the population of the state. We had 7.9% of the cases and 13.6% of the deaths. Today, we are less than 1% of the cases, and we are about 2% of the deaths. So I would say that our flattening and our program has been fairly successful. We were definitely a critical hotspot to begin with, and I think a lot of credit goes to our citizens for embracing the social distancing and making it work. However, on the state level, it's not quite so optimistic. I was looking at it today, and essentially 5 weeks ago, the week-over-week increase in the number of cases was 2,300, roughly, and about 38 deaths a week is what we were getting. Each week, that's what the increase would be. Today, that week-to-week increase is almost 6,000 cases a week and 220-something deaths a week. So we obviously are still every week, that's how many more cases and deaths have been reported over the last week.
statistically, how does that figure when it's now that they've changed the reporting? I mean, not to say, I mean, it's very serious. I'm not, I'm not, I'm coming across as argumentative, I don't mean to be. But in between that, they changed the way that they're identifying COVID deaths, and they've increased the testing, right? So how do you get a clear statistic on that, or you don't, I guess?
Yeah, I think you could get some statistics to it to see percentage-wise. I know the governor had mentioned they're not looking at just total numbers of cases. They are comparing all of that in terms of their trending down, and he would still, at least in what he shared, was that there was a trend down, which what leads him to the next week's potential opening. But I do think we could do some of that. We could give those numbers and help with that. There are, at least on the state website, it gets, I say, better and better as this goes on. And so there is more data and more ability to drill down by locality, to drill down by cases or deaths or almost any other criteria you want. So it's better. And again, when you talk about the practitioners testing versus just their opinion, that number is broken out, what is tested and what is probable as well. So you can see of that 120 some thousand tested or positives, how many were each one as they get into their numbering. So
I guess, one thing that because I will forthrightly say that I was a little caught off guard, and I guess I shouldn't have been thinking of our population, as much as it travels, we have an affluent population. I didn't expect it to hit us here so hard and so fast. So I think too, as we move forward, that's some discussion that we need to be having about information we put out to our citizens about if you travel in September, and you go overseas, when you come back, you may have to consider self-isolating or wearing a mask out in public, if it's not required. So, I think that's going to be sort of part of the information piece that we have to use going forward as well.
Right.
So, because we could be hard hit again. So.
Okay. Anything else from anybody? I do. One more. Make it
Well,
quick.
good. That'll give me a chance to remember what it was I was going to say.
And as we discuss things and go over things and all, and I said it years ago when I got on the board, I said, one day we're gonna probably, before I die, be in a situation where our students learn online. Little did I think it'd be so quick. So I hope I live a long time and bless the students for trying to work so hard and do what they need to do to stay on task, because my three boys are, all over the place with everything they have with school. Also like to say thank you to the school board, the superintendent, the staff at school and all that. These are tough decisions, so don't take anything personal when we're on this board trying to make decisions. It's about money and it's about revenue. It's not about people. We love our students, we love our schools, we love our superintendent, and we just have to make hard decisions. So none of this up here that we discuss and go over and all, which is tough on this board to even think about, well, we might have to cut this or we may have to cut that. And how do we do this and what do we do? It's not a personal thing. It's decisions y'all have entrusted us to make, and tough ones. And that's what we're doing. And that's why when we make a decision up here, I'm thinking one thing, John's thinking something, Ruth, Sue, Jim, we're all thinking different, but at the end of the day, we come to consensus and we come together and go, okay, this is the direction we want to go in. We'd all rather not have to even have this discussion tonight and go over this and drill down on staff and have you thought about this? Did you do that? Why didn't we do this? But that's our job and that's what we do, and it's nothing personal for anyone, and we're just trying to lead the county the best possible way. And then before the governor turns us off and stops watching us tonight, I'd just like to say that we're ready to open as soon as safely possible. The quicker the better, so keep up the good work.
You remember?
I didn't, but
Okay.
one thing I did want to mention is that I'd reached out to Dr. Herron regarding the meals that WJCC has been providing for students. And I think the school system is doing something. I've also caught, I think there are several other organizations that are also helping to get food to families in hotels that don't have a way to get to the pickup locations. And then I know that there's been several businesses, I know Matchbox Barbecue, Matchsticks, I'm sorry, I apologize, but I know they've taken a day too and are providing meals for kids, so just a big thank you for that. But I had asked Dr. Heron how many meals that they had served, and they've served 45,000. And she just said that her staff, including cafeteria workers, bus drivers, custodial staff, have been working in teams, preparing and distributing meals at 4 school sites. So to make this happen for their most needy students. So I appreciate that very much. And
Ruth, do you happen to know, based on your past experience, what happens when school ends?
now I know in the past we did not qualify for there's programs through the federal lunch program, and there's certain areas that and we hadn't. I don't know if that's changed or not. That's probably something we can find out. But and I know that sometimes there's been churches. I think the Methodist Church has stepped in and done something to help with that. But I don't know what the school system's plan, if there are any, for this summer. Good question. So, I was going to say that I don't know if any of you were on the Region 1, Region 2.
Tried to get on, somehow it wasn't working for me.
Well, thank you for trying. I appreciate that. So, we had our Region 1, Region 2 VACO meeting last week, which was done by Zoom. And we got to hear from 2 people in the administration about what's been going on with COVID, also with workforce. And as of now, VACO is planning to hold our conference in November 8th through 10th, and I'm sure they will, as I believe I did announce prior, our regular place we normally go, which is the Homestead, because they've always gone someplace that could accommodate the number of county representatives, and the only place in the Commonwealth is the Homestead. But the Homestead is undergoing a renovation, and so it will have to be moved. And for the first time, it will probably be held somewhere other than a county. It will probably be held in a city. And so, but they are moving ahead with their plans to hold our annual conference this year. So, but I thought the meeting was really well. I thought it went really well, and I do want to thank Delegate Amanda Batten, who jumped on the call as well and participated. Thank you.
Dave, that's all of the comments we have
I'll
from the board
just mention
members?
that the Greater Peninsula Workforce Board did allocate some federal funding to localities, including to local businesses, including 6 James City County businesses that got some money to help prepare them for reopening their businesses. So.
All right, with that, I will take a motion to adjourn until 5 p.m. on May the 12th for our regular meeting.
Motion?
We have a motion. Mr. Stevens?
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Motion carries.
We're adjourned.